Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is John Henderson. I'm 32 years old. This happened in September 2024 in a place called Lost Hollow, deep in the Texas Hill Country. I had only been living in Texas for 6 months, having moved from Ohio with hopes of a fresh start and a chance to carve out a meaningful life. I wish I could say I regret that decision, or that I'd never heard of Lost Hollow at all, but it's too late to change any of it now. All I can do is share what happened and hope it serves as a warning. When I first arrived in Texas, I wasn't exactly experienced with hiking. I'd done a few leisurely trails back in Ohio, nothing too intense, but I found myself increasingly drawn to the rugged landscape of my new state. The hill country had this magnetism I couldn't fully explain. Breathtaking sunsets, craggy hillsides, and endless skies. It made me feel alive and small at the same time. So, when my friend Chris Anderson suggested a weekend trip to Lost Hollow, I jumped at the chance. Chris was 35, a self-proclaimed rugged outdoorsman, which basically meant he owned a decent pair of boots, watched a ton of survival shows, and had a borderline unhealthy relationship with danger. He exuded confidence whenever he talked about the outdoors. He'd been pestering me for weeks, saying I needed a real taste of wilderness, something far from the well-traveled parks and scenic overlooks. He insisted Lost Hollow was perfect, beautiful, untouched, and unknown to most Texans. He also promised it would challenge me and help me come into my own as a budding adventurer. We were joined by my girlfriend Amanda Miller, age 30. Amanda was far more collected than either of us, someone who loved nature for its tranquility but kept her wits about her at all times. She'd been out camping a few times in her youth. She wasn't an expert, but she was definitely the level-headed one who made sure we had enough water, the right gear, and some basic first aid essentials. If there was an adult in the room, it was Amanda. The fourth member of our group was Rachel Davis, 28, a quiet soul with kind eyes. She used to be a camp counselor, but city life had blunted her wilderness instincts. She had come along mostly because she didn't want to stay behind while the rest of us had an adventure. We all had day jobs we didn't especially love, and that sense of restlessness had built up in each of us. This trip felt like a break from the monotony of normal life. I won't lie, Lost Hollow intrigued me from the moment Chris mentioned it. It wasn't on any official list of Texas hiking trails. Many locals apparently avoided it, claiming the area was cursed or haunted. The rumors varied from sightings of strange lights to people vanishing without a trace. It all sounded like urban legend nonsense, but if I'm being honest, that only made me more curious. The four of us took 2 cars out to the rough back roads that led to the edge of Lost Hollow, passing broken fences and overgrown fields. I remember the last gas station we stopped at. A rundown place with a single rusted pump. The old man behind the counter gave us a strange look when we told him we were headed to Lost Hollow. "You folks watch yourselves out there," he said, and spat a mouthful of tobacco onto the gravel by our car. "You get lost in those woods, you might not come back." Chris just smiled, as if it was exactly the reaction he wanted. The plan was to hike into the valley that afternoon, find a good campsite near a stream, and spend the weekend exploring. We had enough food, water filters, portable stoves, and a solid map we'd printed from an outdated website. Chris also had a handheld GPS device that he swore had never let him down. We were set. I remember stepping onto the trailhead and feeling an immediate sense of stillness, like the place had been waiting for us. The trees were thicker than I expected, gnarled oaks and tall pines that shut out the sky when we walked beneath them. The air smelled rich, mossy, and alive. Sunlight filtered through leaves in patches, making the forest floor look like a mosaic. We walked for a couple of hours, only encountering a single deer that stood still long enough to give us a wide-eyed stare before sprinting off. It wasn't until we started down into the hollow that I noticed the woods grow darker, as if the day was slipping away faster. We'd started around 3 in the afternoon. It should have been bright until at least 7 or 8, given the late summer sun. But by 5, shadows stretched all around us, and the air had a chill that didn't match the time of year. Amanda was the first to comment. "It's getting darker faster than I expected," she said, peering up at the sky. "We might want to pick up the pace if we want to set up camp before nightfall." Chris laughed. "Relax. It's not even 6 yet. The trees are just thick. We've got plenty of daylight left." Despite his reassurance, we hurried along, eventually choosing a spot near a creek. The water babbled softly, and the ground was relatively flat. We set up 2 tents, one for me and Amanda, the other for Chris and Rachel, laid out our sleeping bags, and tried to get a fire going. The air held a dampness that made the kindling resistant to flame. Chris struggled with it until Amanda stepped in, piling up the tinder in a more compact way. Eventually, sparks took, and the flames licked hungrily at the small twigs. We had a simple dinner of dehydrated meals and chatted about what trails we might follow in the morning. It felt almost normal, just 4 friends on a camping trip. As the darkness grew absolute, though, I got my first taste of Lost Hollow's oddness. The trees just beyond the ring of firelight seemed to tower higher than before, as if they'd grown while we weren't looking. The stillness of the night wasn't broken by any chirping insects, no crickets, no frogs. It was quiet in a way that made me uneasy. "I'm going to get some more firewood," Chris announced, standing up. "We'll need it to keep the fire going through the night." "Want me to come with you?" I offered. He smirked. "I think I can handle a few sticks of wood, John," he said, sounding amused. "I'll be right back." He trudged off into the darkness, and I listened to the rustle of leaves under his boots until the sound was gone. The rest of us sat around the fire. Amanda took my hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. She must have sensed my discomfort, but I tried to act cool about it. 30 minutes passed, maybe more, and Chris still hadn't returned. Amanda and Rachel exchanged worried looks. I decided to go look for him, carrying a flashlight and trying not to show my own nervousness. I didn't get far before I spotted him emerging from the tree line with a decent pile of branches. He seemed fine, just a little delayed because he'd found some good fallen wood farther away. We returned to camp, stoked the fire, and agreed to call it a night soon. The day's hike had worn us out. We turned in around 10, zipping ourselves into our sleeping bags. Amanda nestled next to me, and within minutes I heard her gentle breathing. I lay awake a while longer, listening to the distant gurgle of the creek. Then I drifted into an uneasy sleep. Some dream pulled at me, images of tall trees bending low, of shadows slithering through the night. At some point, I half woke to a soft scraping sound just outside the tent. I froze, my heart pounding. But it passed, and I convinced myself it was just an animal. I fell asleep again. When I woke the next morning, I immediately felt something was off. The first thing I noticed was that my sleeping bag was unzipped. Not just unzipped, but wide open, and my feet were hanging out. Amanda stirred next to me. She looked at me with confusion, realizing her own sleeping bag was also partially unzipped. We exchanged glances but didn't say anything right away. We'd zipped them ourselves last night, obviously from the outside. So how had they come undone from the inside? Exiting the tent, the chill in the air caught me off guard. dawn had just broken, but the forest carried a sharp cold that belonged in late autumn, not early September. Rachel was already up, fiddling with the camp stove. When I asked her if she'd heard anything, she just shook her head, her face pale. Chris emerged shortly after and made a big show of stretching. "Anybody else sleep like the dead?" he joked. Nobody really responded. We tried to shrug off the weirdness, focusing on making coffee and oatmeal. We had no cell signal out there, which was expected, but my phone battery, a brand new battery I'd just purchased before the trip, was completely drained. Amanda's was also inexplicably low, even though she'd turned it off to save power. Chris's GPS device, which had been fully charged, now displayed only half a battery. It seemed strange, but we chalked it up to the cold, maybe an unknown drain. Chris waved it off, though a flicker of concern showed on his face when he thought nobody was looking. The plan was to explore further into the valley. We packed up our day packs and left the tents behind, planning to return before sundown. The deeper we ventured, the more disorienting it became. According to Chris's GPS, we were traveling northeast, but the physical map indicated we should be heading southeast to reach the next ridge. The surrounding hills looked nothing like the terrain lines we'd studied on the map. It was as though the place had shifted. Amanda began marking trees with small strips of cloth just to ensure we could retrace our steps if needed. About 2 hours into the hike, we came across a fallen tree blocking our path. The trunk was massive, with twisted roots ripped from the ground, revealing damp soil that smelled of rot. Rachel stopped abruptly. "Does anyone hear that?" she whispered. At first, I heard nothing. Then came a faint, distant sound, like humming, drifting through the woods. It wasn't the wind or any bird I'd ever heard. We all paused, exchanging glances. Chris let out a nervous chuckle. "Probably just the wind funneling through the hollow," he said. "Nature can make some weird sounds, you know?" But his tone felt forced. We pressed on. The humming persisted, sometimes growing louder, other times vanishing altogether. Eventually, we decided to head back. The sense of unease had grown so thick that conversation died off. Rachel complained of a headache and feeling like her ears were ringing. Even Chris, usually fearless, seemed subdued. We retraced our steps, or tried to. Twice we passed the same clearing, a strange patch of dead grass ringed by small stones. We recognized it because Amanda had left a blue cloth tied to one of the nearby oaks. It defied explanation. We'd been careful with our bearings, following the GPS, but somehow we were going in circles. Chris cursed under his breath, smacking the side of the GPS as though that would fix it. The device insisted we were heading north, but the sun at midday was telling us a different story. We corrected ourselves manually, ignoring the GPS. It took us another hour to find the creek we'd camped by, which should have been far less. By the time we stumbled back into camp, the sun was already dipping low as if it was late afternoon. "How is it this late already?" Amanda muttered, checking her wristwatch. It read 2:15 p.m., but the sky looked more like 5 or 6. The disorientation left us all on edge. We set about making an early dinner, not wanting to get caught without light. That evening, the air grew even colder, and the forest silence became unnerving. No birds, no insects, nothing except the gurgle of the creek. That second night was when things turned from unsettling to truly terrifying. Rachel was the first to notice something was wrong with our supplies. She opened the plastic bin holding some of our food, sealed crackers, dried fruits and nuts, and recoiled. The crackers had grown patches of mold. The dried fruit had turned black and slimy, and an awful stench wafted out of the bin like something that had been rotting for weeks. These were items we'd packed fresh just the day before. Impossible. Chris ranted about contaminated packaging, But we all knew something unexplainable was happening. We found enough unaffected food in our personal backpacks to get by for a meal, but it put us on alert. If our provisions could rot in mere hours, how long before something else went wrong? We stoked the fire again, but it refused to burn steadily. The flames flickered between orange and a sickly green hue, spitting sparks that scattered into the darkness. Every time we tried to feed it more wood, the fire struggled, as if the forest was resisting our presence. After we ate, Chris grew restless. "I'm going to look for better kindling," he announced. "This wood's too wet or something. I'll be right back." "I'll come with you," I said, remembering the night before. But he shook his head. "I'll be fine. Just keep the fire alive. We need it." He left with a flashlight in hand. Night pressed in from all sides, and we sat close to the weak flames. Amanda began to recount ghost stories she'd heard as a kid, perhaps trying to break the tension, but it only added to the sense of doom. Rachel said little, rubbing her temples and complaining that the humming sound was back, just at the edge of her hearing. When Chris still hadn't returned an hour later, Amanda and I decided to search for him. Rachel insisted on coming too, despite feeling ill. We grabbed flashlights and ventured into the tree line, calling out his name. The forest swallowed our voices, giving back only muffled echoes. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The darkness seemed almost tangible, like a heavy curtain. Eventually, we found him, sitting on a log near the creek, staring at nothing. He had no firewood and didn't acknowledge us until I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Chris?" I asked, my voice betraying my fear. "You okay, man?" He turned slowly, like he'd just woken from a trance. The beam of my flashlight caught his face and I nearly dropped it in shock. His eyes were wide, pupils dilated, and his skin looked pale beneath a sheen of sweat. His lips parted, and he spoke in a low monotone. "I got turned around," he murmured, as though it was a monumental effort to speak. "I'm fine now." Without another word, he stood and headed back towards camp, walking at a slow, almost mechanical pace. Rachel and Amanda exchanged alarmed looks. We followed, the crunch of leaves underfoot the only sound. When we got back, Chris sat near the fire and said nothing. He simply stared at the flames, that blank look still etched into his features. Amanda finally said, "Chris, seriously, you're scaring us. What happened out there?" He blinked, as if struggling to focus on her. "Nothing," he replied, voice flat. "I'm just tired." The atmosphere around the campfire was oppressive, making it hard to breathe. Eventually, we decided to call it a night, huddling into our tents again. Before crawling into my sleeping bag, I noted how frigid the air felt. My watch read 10:30 p.m., but the forest seemed locked in a deeper, older kind of night. Amanda said nothing, just squeezed my hand before turning away to sleep. I can't remember exactly when I was startled awake, but it must have been past midnight. A noise pierced the stillness, a ragged scream that echoed through the hollow. I shot upright, fumbling for my flashlight. Amanda was already awake, eyes wild with panic. We scrambled out of the tent to find Rachel standing outside hers, tears streaming down her face. "It's Chris!" she cried, voice trembling. "He attacked me!" Chris stood near the fire, illuminated by the dying embers. His posture was rigid, and in one hand he held a hunting knife. The blade glinted in the flickering light, and his expression was a terrifying blank slate. I saw deep red marks on Rachel's neck where he'd apparently tried to choke her. My adrenaline spiked, and Amanda and I rushed forward. "Chris, what the hell are you doing?" I shouted, trying to keep my distance in case he lunged. He stared at us, unblinking, eyes like black pits. "She was making too much noise," he said quietly. "It had to stop." A flicker of fear and confusion passed over Rachel's face. "I wasn't making noise," she whispered, shaking. "I was asleep." Chris's hand tightened around the knife. We inched toward him, trying not to spook him further. Amanda glanced at me, and I saw her plan in her eyes. She would circle behind him while I kept his attention. At least, that was the idea. I took a slow step closer. "Chris, put the knife down. This isn't you, man." He showed no sign of recognition, as if he didn't even know me. A split second later, Amanda tackled him from behind. They both hit the ground, and I grabbed his wrist, wrestling for control of the knife. Chris was incredibly strong, more than I ever remembered. He snarled like an animal, thrashing beneath us. It took all of Amanda's and my combined strength to pin him, and even then he was bucking and twisting, nearly throwing us off. Rachel seized the opportunity to rip the knife from his hand, flinging it aside. We tied Chris's wrists with rope, adrenaline coursing through our bodies. He stopped struggling after a moment, lying still on the ground, his breathing heavy. Rachel pressed her back against a tree, sobbing softly. Amanda knelt by Chris, her voice shaking. "We're not letting him go until he explains what's happening." I hovered over Chris, shining my flashlight in his face. He stared up at me with an unsettling calm. "What have you done with him?" he asked, his voice pitched strangely. "He's gone." The hairs on my neck stood up. It was like he was talking about himself in the third person, or as if something else inhabited his body. I had no idea what to do. We kept him tied near the fire, uncertain whether we should move him inside a tent or keep him in the open. We were afraid he'd lash out again. Eventually, the three of us dozed off in shifts, always with one person awake to watch Chris. He sat there, occasionally murmuring to himself, words we couldn't always understand. Some of it sounded like nonsense, other parts like fragments of a language I didn't recognize. At dawn, or what passed for dawn in that cursed place, we decided it was time to leave. We had to get out of Lost Hollow. Our supplies were suspect, Chris was dangerous, and the forest itself felt like an enemy. But as we started to pack, our sense of time once again betrayed us. According to Amanda's watch, it was 7 a.m., yet the sky was still as dark as twilight. The watch must be broken, we told ourselves, but it kept perfect time back home. The final blow came when we realized half our gear was missing. Amanda's backpack was gone, Rachel's smaller pack too. We searched frantically, but there was no sign of them. Our tents were still there, rummaged through as if someone had rifled around in the night while we slept. The only supplies left were in my main backpack and Chris's. Yet, Chris's bag was disorganized, items strewn about as though ransacked by an animal. The sense of violation was overwhelming. "Let's go, now," Amanda insisted, voice firm. "We don't need all our gear. We'll leave the tents if we have to." Rachel and I agreed. The question was, what do we do about Chris? He was still bound at the wrists, sitting quietly, though his eyes darted between us with unsettling focus. We debated leaving him tied up until we could bring back help, but the guilt of abandoning him, even in his altered state, was too much. So we decided to untie him but keep a close watch. I'll never forget the eerie smile on his face when we loosened the ropes. He offered no thanks, just stared. With the remains of our supplies in my bag, we set off in what we hoped was the direction of the trailhead. The forest closed in around us, branches overhead forming a canopy so thick that the sun barely penetrated. Even the creek we'd used as a reference had vanished behind us. We were counting on the marked trees Amanda had tied cloth to, but most of them were gone, or maybe they'd never been in the places we thought. We found only 2 strips of cloth the entire day, and both looked old and weathered, as though they'd been there for months. not hours. Chris lagged behind, sometimes muttering to himself, other times walking in silence. I kept glancing over my shoulder, worried he'd snap again. Twice, I asked him if he was all right. He'd just look at me, lips curling in that unsettling grin, and say nothing. We traveled for what felt like an entire day, yet the sky never brightened beyond a hazy overcast. We stopped briefly to eat some of the few remaining snacks, beef jerky and a couple of granola bars. Each time we paused, we heard that distant humming, as if the forest was alive with an undercurrent of malevolence. When we resumed walking, the sense of going in circles grew. The terrain seemed to shift. We'd descend a small ravine only to find ourselves on higher ground minutes later. By what should have been late afternoon, we found ourselves by that same creek again. It was unmistakable. Same bend, same moss-covered rocks, the exact spot we'd camped next to. Our campsite was gone, though. In its place was a circle of ash where our fire had been. The tents, gear, and anything else we'd left behind were missing, as if someone had scooped them up. Footprints, maybe ours, maybe not, crisscrossed in the mud. That was the moment I realized we might be trapped here by something beyond normal explanation. Rachel grew more agitated, her eyes darting around as if seeing shapes behind every tree. "I can't keep going," she whispered, sinking to her knees. "It's like we're chasing our own tails." Amanda crouched next to her. "We have to try, Rach. We can't just stay put." In a low voice, Chris said, "We never left." We turned to him, but he offered no clarification, just stared at the remains of the fire pit. Night fell unnaturally fast again. We had to find shelter, so we decided to make a temporary camp. No tents, just a small fire and a lean-to constructed from branches and a tarp Chris still had in his pack. We managed to get the fire started, though it sputtered and emitted greenish sparks. Hunger gnawed at us, but we rationed what little food remained. Sometime in the middle of the night, I awoke to a rustling sound. My heart hammered in my chest, recalling the previous night's horrors. Carefully, I unzipped my sleeping bag, this time from the outside so I was sure I'd know if it opened again, and peered around. The fire was reduced to embers. Amanda lay beside me, her face tense even in sleep. Rachel was curled under the tarp. Chris was gone. I grabbed a flashlight, not wanting to wake the others and cause more panic. I walked a few yards from the lean-to, following a faint sound like leaves scraping. My beam of light caught Chris's silhouette near a tree. He was hunched over something on the ground. I stepped closer, calling his name quietly. He didn't answer. When I finally reached him, I saw he was crouched over a dead rabbit, its neck twisted at an unnatural angle. Blood matted its fur, gleaming dark in the flashlight's beam. Chris was running his fingers across the rabbit's body in a slow, almost tender way. I gagged, the metallic smell hitting my nostrils. "Chris," I whispered, my voice trembling. "What are you doing?" He looked up, that same vacant expression on his face. Then he smiled. A grin that spread too wide, the corners of his mouth twitching. "It was suffering," he said softly, though the rabbit was obviously freshly killed. I took a step back, wanting to call for the others. But part of me was too terrified of how Chris might react if I startled him. "Okay," I managed. "Come back to camp, all right? We'll figure this out." He stood slowly, the carcass dropping from his hands. "You should have left me tied," he said, voice devoid of emotion. "Chris, please, let's just go back." He started walking toward me, not aggressively, but with a purpose that made me uneasy. I backed away, my flashlight shaking. After a few tense moments, he simply brushed past me and returned to the lean-to. I stood alone in the darkness, heart pounding, before mustering the courage to follow. The next morning, if that term even meant anything in that twisted place, Rachel was missing. The remaining embers of the fire still glowed, and Amanda was up, pacing with a fearful expression. "She must have gone off to the creek or something," Amanda guessed, though her voice betrayed her doubt. We waited, called Rachel's name, searched the immediate perimeter. Nothing. No footprints leading away, no sound of movement in the bushes. It was like she vanished into thin air. Chris watched us search, offering no help. He sat cross-legged by the fire, hands folded in his lap. Every so often he'd tilt his head as though listening to something only he could hear. After an hour of fruitless searching, Amanda and I confronted him. "Chris," Amanda demanded, "where is Rachel?" He shrugged, staring off into the trees. "She left," he said simply. "She wouldn't have gone off alone," I snapped. "Something happened. Did you see anything?" "No." His eyes flicked to me, lifeless, then away again. "I'm hungry." Horrified and furious, I wanted to shout at him, shake him, anything to get a real answer. But fear clamped down on my throat. Amanda grabbed my arm, keeping me from doing something rash. We decided the best course of action was to look for Rachel in the area we last saw her, though I suspected she might be gone for good. That dreadful pit in my stomach grew, and I thought of the stories of people disappearing in these cursed woods. We split up, me heading east, Amanda heading west, each doing short loops around camp. We promised to call out if we found anything. After half an hour of frantic searching, I stumbled on a torn piece of fabric snagged on a low branch. It was the same color as Rachel's jacket. My pulse quickened. I followed a trail of disturbed leaves and snapped twigs, eventually coming to a spot where the ground was soaked dark. It didn't take a genius to realize it might be blood. That's when I saw Rachel's jacket, shredded and stained. But there was no sign of her body. The forest around me was silent as a tomb. An overwhelming sense of helplessness crashed over me, and I screamed her name until my voice cracked. When I returned to camp with the jacket, Amanda's face crumpled. She let out a ragged sob, but she was determined to keep searching. Chris still sat in that same spot, hardly seeming to care. We confronted him, anger fueling us, but all he said was, "She'll come back." Amanda and I didn't know what to do. We couldn't stay there, yet we couldn't leave Rachel behind, if she was even alive. Finally, Amanda said, "Let's give it one more day, John. One more day to look for her. If we don't find her, we'll try to get out and bring help." We spent the remainder of that day combing the forest near the creek. The place felt endless, the tall trunks blotting out the sun. The few open patches of sky revealed only swirling gray clouds. No matter how far we walked, we always seemed to circle back to the same stretch of creek or the campsite. By dusk, we were exhausted, emotionally and physically. No sign of Rachel, no clues beyond that torn jacket. Chris barely spoke, eating some of the leftover jerky and sipping water. We forced ourselves to eat something as well, but it tasted like ash in my mouth. I thought of Rachel's kind face, her quiet smile, and felt tears burn at the corners of my eyes. Night brought new torments. Time once again felt warped. The fire, which I tended with near-obsessive care, only burned in odd bursts of greenish flame. At times, I could swear hours passed, but my watch insisted it had only been minutes. Other times, I'd glance at the watch and see the hands leap forward half an hour in what felt like seconds. It's impossible to describe how disorienting it was, like reality itself was unraveling. At some point, Amanda dozed off next to me, leaving me alone by the smoldering fire. Chris had vanished into the darkness. I was too tired to chase after him, so I just kept watch, every snapping twig making me jolt. Then, out of nowhere, Rachel appeared at the edge of the firelight. Stepping out from behind a tree, my heart soared with relief, but that feeling quickly sank into dread. Her eyes were hooded, her movements stiff. Her face was expressionless, except for a too wide smile that tugged at the corners of her mouth. She walked slowly toward me, not saying a word. "Rachel," I breathed, standing up carefully. "Oh God, are you okay?" She didn't respond. Her clothes were torn and caked in mud. A faint odor clung to her like earth mixed with the decay. I rushed forward, but something in her posture made me stop short. Her head tilted ever so slightly, like she was studying me, unsure how to behave. Then she opened her mouth, but no sound came out except a strange, wet gasp. I called for Amanda, who woke with a start. When she saw Rachel, her eyes went wide. "Rachel," she said softly, "where were you?" Still no response. Then, as if suddenly remembering how to speak, Rachel whispered, "I'm here." Her voice was distant, hollow. That's when I realized she was blinking too little, her eyes unnaturally focused. Amanda took a tentative step toward her, arms outstretched as if to hug her. Before Amanda could reach her, Rachel's head jerked sharply to the side and her eyes rolled back. Chris emerged from the darkness behind Rachel, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. It was horrifying. The two of them stood there, almost mirror images of each other's vacancy, wearing these eerie smiles. Something was profoundly wrong with them. "Rachel," I pleaded, tears springing to my eyes. "Please talk to us. Are you hurt?" She blinked slowly, as if processing the words. Then her smile stretched further, almost impossibly wide. "It's beautiful," she said cryptically, voice trembling with an emotion I couldn't parse. Wonder, terror, or both. Amanda and I exchanged a frantic look. We had no idea what to do, but we sensed danger in the air. Suddenly, Rachel took a step closer to me, eyes fixed on my face. Her mouth moved soundlessly before she spoke again in a voice that almost wasn't hers. "I saw it. I saw what lives in these trees." Tears trickled down her cheeks, but her expression remained that horrifying grin. "It wants us all." Chris's hand remained on her shoulder, like he was guiding her. He looked at me then, and something flickered behind his eyes. "We belong to this place now," he murmured. A second later, Rachel lunged. She moved faster than I would have believed possible, slamming into me. We crashed to the ground, her nails scraping at my arms. I shouted in surprise, and Amanda rushed forward, trying to pull her off. Chris moved to intercept Amanda, grabbing her wrist and twisting it until she yelped in pain. Chaos erupted around the dying fire. I struggled beneath Rachel, my back scraping against rocks. Her face loomed over mine, her mouth open in a silent snarl, tears still falling from her eyes. I managed to wrestle an arm free, grabbing a piece of smoldering wood from the fire pit. With no other choice, I jabbed the burning end at her shoulder. She let out a shriek, recoiling long enough for me to shove her off. Amanda, meanwhile, had kneed Chris in the groin, breaking his grip. She stumbled back, clutching her wrist. Chris recovered quickly, lunging at her again. I tackled him, adrenaline fueling me, and we rolled across the ground. I heard Amanda scream something, but it was lost under the roar of blood in my ears. In the flickering light, Chris's face was contorted, but there was no recognition, no empathy. Just a cold, predatory focus. He pinned me, his hands clawing at my throat. Spots danced in my vision as I desperately tried to push him off. Then, out of nowhere, Amanda swung a heavy branch at his head. The blow connected with a sickening crack. Chris grunted, releasing his grip on me. He pitched forward, collapsing onto the forest floor, motionless. Coughing, I scrambled upright, chest heaving. Amanda stood with the branch in her hands, eyes wide with horror at what she'd done. Chris lay face down in the dirt, a trickle of blood oozing from his temple. Rachel knelt a few feet away, cradling her injured shoulder. tears still streaming, that terrifying smile gone. Now she just looked lost, terrified. Amanda and I approached Chris cautiously, checking for a pulse. He was still breathing, but unconscious, relief mingled with shock. We had subdued him, but what now? Then I heard Rachel let out a choked sob. When I turned to look, she seemed to have regained a sliver of her old self, her eyes brimming with confusion and pain, as if waking from a nightmare. She whispered my name. "John, help me." I hurried to her side, noting the burn mark on her shoulder. The smell of singed fabric and skin made my stomach churn. She winced, but leaned against me, trembling. I don't know what happened," she managed, voice breaking. Amanda knelt next to us, tears in her own eyes. "Rachel, are you okay? Where did you go?" Rachel shook her head. "I can't remember. It's like I woke up in the woods and everything was dark. Then Chris found me." She glanced at him, lying unconscious near the fire, and her face crumpled in despair. "I'm so sorry, John. It felt like someone else was controlling me. Despite my fear and confusion, I felt a surge of sympathy. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't Rachel's fault. Or Chris's. Something in Lost Hollow had twisted them, invaded their minds. We had to get out. The rest of that night was a blur. We bound Chris again, this time more securely, though with enough care that he wouldn't lose circulation. Rachel barely stayed conscious, slipping in and out of delirium, murmuring nonsense about the forest and an ancient presence among the trees. Amanda tended to Rachel's burn, using the last of our medical supplies. As dawn approached, though once again the sky stayed stubbornly dark, we heard Chris stir. He groaned, trying to sit up, but the ropes held him. He glared at us, but there was a flicker of recognition in his gaze. At times, he seemed to know who we were, apologizing for attacking us, blaming the place, swearing he'd never do it again. Then, a second later, that vacant expression would return and he'd mutter about belonging to the forest. We grabbed our things, what little remained, and prepared to leave for good. No more searching for a route. We'd walk in one direction until we found a road or a sign of civilization. If we had to circle the hollow 5 times, we'd do it. Anything was better than waiting around to be picked off by whatever lived here. We fashioned a makeshift gag for Chris, not wanting his outburst to draw attention or cause more chaos. Then we set out, Amanda supporting Rachel, who limped along with the glassy eyes. I kept a hand on Chris's bound arms, leading him forward. Every now and then he'd shudder, as though fighting an internal battle. Hours passed, though the oppressive gloom never lifted. The forest seemed endless, shifting, alive in ways no forest should be. My watch read 9 a.m., but the sky might as well have been midnight. We pressed on until, in a moment of panic, Rachel doubled over and screamed. "Stop!" she cried, dropping to her knees. Her voice was raw, terrified. "Rachel, what is it?" Amanda crouched beside her, scanning the shadows as if expecting an attack. Rachel grabbed at her head. "It's in my mind," she sobbed. "It's pulling me back." Then, without warning, she sprang up and bolted into the trees. Amanda and I shouted, chasing after her, but Chris staggered, nearly falling. I couldn't chase Rachel without letting go of Chris, and Amanda was too exhausted to keep up. We tried anyway, sprinting through gnarled roots and low branches, but Rachel was gone within seconds, swallowed by the darkness of the hollow. Her cries faded into the distance. Amanda collapsed against a tree, tears streaming down her face. "We can't lose her again," she said, voice shaking. I wrapped an arm around her, looking frantically for any sign of Rachel's passing. Broken branches or footprints, anything, but the forest concealed all traces. Chris let out a muffled groan behind his gag, struggling against his bonds. Despair weighed on me like a physical force. Then I heard something rustle behind us, and a figure emerged, a silhouette that I recognized with a jolt. It was Rachel, or at least her shape. She stood about 30 feet away, motionless, watching us. My heart leaped with cautious hope. "Rachel," I called, taking a hesitant step forward. But as I drew closer, the figure dissolved, melting into the shadows. A trick of the light, or maybe the forest itself taunting us. Amanda let out a choked sob. We were trapped in a nightmare that defied logic. That's when Chris, eyes bulging, started thrashing. A low, guttural growl rumbled from his throat. He kicked out, nearly knocking me over. I tried to keep him steady, but he bucked like a wild animal. He tore free from my grip, twisting around to slam his bound fists into my side. The impact sent me sprawling. Before I could recover, he stumbled forward, gag still in place, and vanished between two massive oaks. Amanda rushed to me, helping me to my feet. Fear and desperation mingled in her wide eyes. "Do we go after him, or Rachel?" she asked. A wave of helplessness crashed over me. I don't know," I stammered, chest burning from the blow. Splitting up again would be suicide. Staying put was equally insane. She looked around at the ancient trees, their trunks coated in moss that almost seemed to pulse under the dim light. "We have to get out. We'll never save them if we're trapped here ourselves." Nodding, I took her hand, and we pushed forward again, away from the creek, away from the campsite, away from everything we knew. Occasionally, we heard distant screams. Rachel's voice, Chris's voice, or maybe just the wind. We never saw them again. Time blurred into a nightmarish slog. We trudged over endless slopes, crossing the same creek bed multiple times, or so it seemed. We slept in brief, terrified snatches, never letting the fire go completely out. Our food dwindled to nearly nothing, forcing us to chew on leftover granola bar wrappers for any trace of nutrients. At one point, we heard helicopters overhead, but the sky remained that unchanging darkness, and the sound faded as quickly as it came. Eventually, on what might have been the 4th or 5th day, my watch had started showing random times, its hands spinning sporadically. We saw a break in the trees ahead. The sight was almost too good to be true. We stumbled toward it, hearts pounding. As we passed the last line of gnarled oaks, we stepped into a clearing drenched in sunlight. Real sunlight. It was so bright that Amanda and I shielded our eyes, blinking as they adjusted. I almost wept with relief. Behind us, the forest loomed, no longer unnaturally dark. The place looked like an ordinary stretch of woodland under midday light, as though the horror inside existed behind a veil. We hurried forward, hands clasped together, afraid to look back. And just like that, we spotted the old dirt road that led us to civilization. A wave of disbelief washed over me. We had escaped. Within an hour, we found a small store near a crossroads, different from the gas station we'd passed initially, but close enough to a real highway that we felt safe. People stared at our tattered clothes and haunted expressions, but they helped us. An ambulance was called, though we both refused to go to a hospital at first, desperate to call for rescue teams to find Rachel and Chris. We told the local authorities everything, but they gave us looks that veered between pity and disbelief. A search party was organized, yet days later they turned up nothing. The official story became that Chris and Rachel were lost in the wilderness. The authorities found no trace of them, nor any sign that a campsite had been in the valley. When they pressed us for details, Amanda and I tried to explain about the rotting supplies, the time distortions, the transformations in Chris and Rachel, but we only got skeptical glances. Eventually, the search teams gave up, calling them missing persons. I wish I could say the nightmares stopped there, but they haven't. Amanda and I tried to return to normal life, but we carry the weight of what we saw in Lost Hollow. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear that same distant humming. I'll look out the window and see shadows shifting in the yard, branches bent in a wind that isn't there. Amanda wakes up screaming, convinced she sees Chris or Rachel standing at the foot of our bed. I still wonder if we truly escaped. The day we stumbled out of those woods, I felt something cling to me, a whisper in my mind telling me we were never really free. Even now, months later, I'll glance at the clock and see the numbers flicker, as if time still can't decide what it wants to be. I'll catch glimpses of movement in dark corners, an echo of the forest, or maybe just my imagination. But I know something followed us, or at least followed me. In my quieter moments, I think about Chris and Rachel, and the last time I saw them. Lost in that endless wilderness, possessed or consumed by whatever ancient presence lived there. Maybe they're still out there, wandering in circles, forever trapped. Or perhaps they became part of that cursed place, just as the old stories said. As for Amanda and me, we rarely speak of Lost Hollow anymore. When we do, it's in hushed tones with a shared look that only we understand. The look of people who have touched genuine darkness and know it might never let them go. All I can do is tell our story, in hopes that others will heed my warning. Don't go looking for Lost Hollow. Don't be seduced by its legends or the promise of untouched beauty. If you see it on a map, or hear about it from a reckless thrill seeker, run the other way. Nothing is worth what we experienced in those woods, the price we paid in blood and sanity. My name is John Henderson, and this is what happened to me in September 2024. I don't know if I've truly escaped or if I'm just living on borrowed time, but I do know one thing with absolute certainty. Some places aren't meant to be found, and some horrors never let go. My name is Martin Blake, and I'm 36 years old. This happened in July of 2025. Even now, remembering it makes my skin crawl. It's as if my senses are all tuned to the moment when everything went wrong, like part of me never left those winding Texas roads. I've been living on the road in my RV for over a year, traveling state to state, working as a freelance mechanic wherever I can find a decent paycheck, and filming my adventures for my small YouTube channel, Wheels and Wrenches. You could say I'm living the dream. No mortgage, no 9-to-5, no real commitments. I just follow the highways, fix the occasional engine, and make travel vlogs for the 2,000 or so people subscribed to my channel. Most of the time, I drift along happily, meeting interesting folks, soaking in scenic views, and avoiding trouble. But every once in a while, something tugs at my sense of caution. I usually chalk it up to superstition, or maybe just the natural wariness that comes from being alone so often. This time, though, I wish I'd listened to that little voice in my head telling me to keep driving, telling me not to turn off the main road. I first heard about the place from a gas station cashier named Mac, somewhere between Wimberley and Fisher, Texas. I'd pulled in to top off my tank and stretch my legs. Mac, a leathery old guy with scraggly white hair, seemed intrigued by my rig, a 30-foot Class CRV that I'd lovingly restored over the past 6 months. He complimented me on the paint job, asked what I was doing in those parts, and so on. When I told him I was looking for scenic places to film, he got this twinkle in his eye. He leaned in, gestured for me to come closer, and half whispered, "You know, there's a real hidden spot up near the Devil's Backbone. Used to be an RV park called Black Hollow Acres, or some such. Been shut down since forever. Word is, there's a killer view if you go in far enough. Nobody goes there anymore." At the phrase "killer view," I perked up. Those words were basically catnip for a travel vlogger like me. "Why'd it shut down?" I asked, grabbing a bottle of cold tea from a fridge near the cashier. Mac shrugged. "Place got a bad rep. Folks say it's haunted or cursed or something. I just figure the owners went bankrupt. Last real news I heard was from the mid-90s. But if you're curious, well, you strike me as the curious type. You can still get in, though the official entrance is boarded up. There's a gap in the fence, if you know where to look." He winked at me then, as if he was offering an invitation to break a minor taboo. I should have known better. Cursed, haunted, or bankrupt, none of it boded well. But I'd heard plenty of ghost stories on the road before, and none of them had ever panned out to be more than local legend. Besides, my channel could always use a hint of the macabre to spice up my usual "here's how to change an RV's oil" content. I thanked Mac, paid for my gas, and hopped back into the driver's seat, sipping my tea. The sun was sliding down behind the rolling hills to the west, and I figured I'd either find a safe place to park soon or make a run for the main highway. But the devil on my shoulder, or the content creator in my head, urged me to see what was so special about this old RV park. After all, how many viewers get a kick out of old, abandoned attractions? At least some, I thought. So I steered north, following Mac's rough directions. Head down Devil's Backbone Scenic Drive, watch for a battered sign that's half buried in brush, turn left on the dirt path. On the radio, static mingled with faint country music, occasionally giving way to sermon stations. The name Devil's Backbone itself had its share of local legends. Stories of ghostly apparitions, phantom riders, and unexplainable lights. I'd never seen anything on it that was more than rumor, but I'll admit the road had an eerie vibe, with steep drop-offs on either side and a long ridge that twisted through the hills like a snake's spine. After about 20 minutes, the real highways disappeared behind me. The sky was a watercolor of orange and purple, the summer air still hot and thick. The wind had picked up, enough to rattle the loose metal awning on my RV. Sure enough, I came upon a ragged piece of signage hidden in some tall grass. It didn't even have legible letters anymore, just rust and a faint outline that might have said Hollow Acres once. I swung left onto a dirt path that was overgrown with weeds. My rig bumped along, tires crunching gravel and twigs. If I wasn't careful, I'd blow a tire. I inched forward, scanning for any sign of a fence. A few hundred yards in, I saw it. Tall, chain link, topped with rusty barbed wire. It looked old, with gaps in places where the wire had come undone or been cut. I parked in front of a wide hole in the fence that faced me like a yawning mouth. A crooked sign on the fence read, "No trespassing property of Black Hollow Acres." Hard to read, but definitely from an older era. I don't know what it was, excitement, maybe, but I felt a little jolt in my chest. I hopped out of the RV and walked to the perimeter, noticing the fence was caved in on one side as if someone had driven a truck right through it years ago. Nothing but silence and the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. The setting sun cast long shadows across dusty ground. I told myself I'd check it out quickly, maybe get some footage, and if it seemed safe enough, I'd camp overnight. The place looked deserted anyway, and technically I was trespassing, but with the state of disrepair, I doubted anyone would come around to run me off. I guided my RV carefully through the fence opening, checking for metal spikes or jagged wire that could slice my tires. Once inside, it was a short drive through the more overgrown terrain before the space opened up into a clearing. And there, I saw the shape of what used to be a large open campsite. A few ancient wooden picnic tables, collapsed canopies, a dilapidated playground with a rusted swing set. Beyond that, I could make out the silhouettes of other RVs, or what remained of them, scattered like tombstones. I found a relatively flat spot near the tree line and parked. The sun was nearly gone now, the sky fading to a dusky purple. I cut the engine, stepped outside, and just listened. It was eerily quiet. Usually in a place like this, I'd expect birds or crickets or the distant hum of traffic, but there was none of that, just a profound hush. Even the wind seemed to die down. I filmed a short segment on my phone, planning to polish it later when I got my main camera out. Hey guys, Marty here from Wheels and Wrenches. I'm at this old abandoned RV park supposedly called Black Hollow Acres. Found it off the beaten path near the Devil's Backbone. Check out these relics. I panned the phone to show the rusted, roofless RV frames. I don't know what I'll find tonight, but stay tuned. I wrapped up my little introduction, then moved around the clearing, shining a flashlight into the carcasses of old rigs. One was missing its entire front end, gutted like a fish. Another had a collapsed roof with vines snaking through broken windows. I stepped inside one, half expecting to find raccoons or maybe squatters. It was empty except for some tattered moldy furniture and a couple of broken plates. The walls bore ancient water stains. A chill ran down my spine. What if somebody used to call this place home once upon a time? Eventually, I returned to my own RV and cooked a quick meal. Some canned chili heated on my little propane stove. I was writing down notes for my next video when I heard it. A single, long honk echoing through the trees. It was distant, yet unmistakable, like someone laying on an old-fashioned car horn for about 5 seconds straight. I froze, my spoon hovering over the chili. A honk? Out here? There was no road leading in except the one I came through, and I sure as hell didn't see any other vehicles. The fence was in tatters, but it wasn't likely more people would just show up here at night. I stood, peered out my window, and switched off my interior lights. The clearing looked empty, bathed in moonlight. For a long minute I waited, ears straining. Nothing came. No second honk, no sound of an engine, no headlights. I chalked it up to a weird echo, maybe from the main road, though it seemed too close for that. I locked my RV door and tried not to think about it. I told myself stories can get blown out of proportion. Maybe teenagers come here sometimes to screw around. But the feeling of being watched settled over me like a fog. I turned in around 10, physically tired but mentally wound up. I remember lying in bed, the hum of my battery-powered fan a comforting white noise. Sleep came in fits. At some point in the night, I jerked awake for no apparent reason, heart pounding. I listened, but heard only silence, though something in my gut told me I wasn't alone. I forced myself back to sleep, thinking I might just be spooked by the new environment. When morning came, I felt even less rested. I brewed some coffee on the propane stove and stepped outside to get fresh air. The day was warm, with a faint promise of summer's punishing heat to come. Sunlight revealed just how decrepit the RV park truly was. Tall grass, a few scraggly trees near the edges, the old playground, everything tinted with that lifeless, dusty hue. I decided to walk around and investigate. My phone had zero service, that was expected out here. At least I could film with my camera and upload later. Around midday, I wandered to a row of abandoned RVs that looked mostly intact. They were spaced apart, as though the owners had driven in, parked, and then never returned. I noticed something unnerving about them. None had license plates, or if they did, they'd been removed long ago. The front windshields were dusty or broken, revealing dark interiors. On a few, the brand emblems had been scraped off or had corroded into illegibility. I tried to open one's door, found it locked. Another had a door that was forced open. Inside, a table was set with chipped plates, a board game in mid-play, like the owners had abruptly left. I felt a prickling sense of intrusion. Was I stepping into someone's last moments, frozen in time? As I moved on, a flicker of white caught my eye near a rotting picnic table. I turned to see a barefoot teenage girl standing there, wearing a white prairie-style dress that seemed a little out of place for modern times. She looked to be maybe 14 or 15. Her hair was mousy brown, loose around her shoulders, and she regarded me with wide eyes as if startled. I raised a hand in a friendly wave. Hey there. Didn't think anybody else was out here." She said nothing at first, just stared. I approached cautiously. If she was lost or in trouble, I might need to help. But I also realized how strange it was to find a teenage girl in an abandoned RV park, alone, barefoot. "You okay?" I asked, stopping a respectful distance away. After a long pause, she nodded slowly. Then she said almost shyly, "You shouldn't be here." A jolt of anxiety shot through me. "Is this private property?" I asked, though I knew it probably was. "I'm not here to cause trouble, just exploring." She looked toward a cluster of trees, avoiding my gaze. "He comes at night," she murmured. "He drives at night." I frowned. "Who drives at night?" She shook her head. "You need to leave before the third horn." I tried to ask for clarification, but she turned and walked away, disappearing between two battered RV shells before I could catch up. I called out, but she didn't answer. A sense of disquiet gnawed at me. Who was she? Could she be living here, or maybe squatting with her family? Part of me worried she might be in danger. Another part worried that I was in danger. The memory of that honk last night came back in a flash, sending a chill up my spine. Eventually, I figured I'd look for her or any sign of others. But after an hour of searching, all I found were more rusted husks of RVs, half buried in weeds and collapsing wooden structures. No sign of the girl. I started to wonder if I imagined her. The midday heat pressed down on me, intensifying the dryness in my mouth. I returned to my own RV for water and a quick sandwich. That's when I realized all my electronics had died. My phone, which had about 60% battery in the morning, was now inexplicably at 0%. My solar power station read empty. Even my usually reliable generator, practically new, wouldn't start. I did a quick mechanical check, verifying the spark plug, the fuel line, all the usual suspects. Everything looked fine, yet it refused to turn over. I was stumped, and that rarely happens with me. I shrugged it off, promising myself I'd do a more thorough inspection later. For now, I decided I'd had enough weirdness. I wanted to get out of Black Hollow Acres, maybe find a safer spot along a public roadside or a real RV park. So I hopped in the driver's seat, turned the ignition. The engine roared to life, which felt like a relief. I put the rig in drive, navigating carefully toward where I'd come in. The path took me back toward the fence. Or it should have. But after 10 minutes of winding through trees, I emerged into the same clearing I'd just left. The same old picnic tables, and the same cluster of rusted swings. Confused, I retraced my route carefully, double-checking references, a few distinctive boulders and fallen logs. I was sure I was going the correct way, yet each time I tried, I looped right back to the same clearing. Frustration mounted. I actually got out of the RV and tried to walk the perimeter on foot, figuring I could locate the fence and then direct myself to it. But the trees seemed denser, the underbrush thicker than before, as if the entire layout had shifted. After over an hour of stumbling around in the heat, I ended right back where I started. Each loop chipped away at my confidence, at my sense of reason. I chalked it up to being turned around in unfamiliar territory, but a voice in my head whispered that something else was happening. By late afternoon, the sun sank lower, the shadows stretching across the clearing. A prickle of dread told me I'd be spending another night here, whether I wanted to or not, I set up a small campfire near my RV as my generator still wouldn't start. The air felt electric, charged with tension I couldn't name. Every rustle in the brush made me jump. As the dusk settled, I was startled by the sound of an engine. I stood quickly, scanning the tree line. Nothing. The sound faded as abruptly as it appeared. My heart hammered. Perhaps it was just my imagination, or maybe the wind carrying noise from a distant road. Regardless, the sense of isolation made me feel like a cornered animal. Night fell. I didn't cook a real meal, didn't have the stomach for it. I forced down a protein bar and some water. A silence so profound enveloped the area that I could hear my own heartbeat. Then, at precisely 3:33 a.m., I checked my watch in the moonlight. I heard it again. A single, long honk, louder than the night before. It sounded like it was just beyond the circle of trees. I scrambled to the driver's seat, flinging the door open, half expecting to see headlights. But there was only darkness. Then I saw it. Or rather, I saw a shape. An RV, black and hulking, driving slowly between the trees without any visible headlights. If it had been a normal vehicle, the underbrush would have made it impossible to navigate. But the thing glided smoothly, as if the ground were flat pavement. The windows were dark, the body battered and dusty. No license plates that I could see. It gave one more short honk, so piercing it made my teeth rattle, and then it vanished deeper into the woods without leaving behind so much as a tire track. I nearly bolted from my RV, wanting to chase it down, demand some explanation, but every instinct told me to stay put. Instead, I locked my doors, yanked the curtains shut, and tried to quell my panic. My mind spun with questions. Who was driving that black RV? How did it move with no lights in that thick forest? And why was it honking? I barely slept. My dreams, when they came, were a swirl of shadowy roads and pale, barefoot figures standing by the roadside beckoning me. By the time dawn came, I was a sweaty, anxious mess, but I resolved to get out, no matter what it took. I threw open the door, grabbed my map of Texas, my mechanical tools, and walked around the clearing, ignoring the fact that I couldn't get phone reception or that my compass seemed to spin uselessly. Maybe the old fence had a gap that led to a real road. I'd hike if I had to. That was when I saw the girl again, Delilah, or whoever she was, standing near the swing set. I marched over, half yelling, "Hey, where can I find the exit? How do I get out of here?" She turned to me, her expression forlorn. "He comes at night," she repeated. I huffed in frustration. "Yeah, I've seen him. That black RV, why can't I leave?" She shook her head. "You can leave if you walk, but you can't take your home with you. If you drive, he drives too, and when he drives, you can't outrun him." I hesitated, absorbing her words. "What do you mean, if I walk? You're saying I should abandon my RV?" She nodded, solemn. "You must walk through the woods, find the dry creek bed, follow it until you see the sky lighten. You might get out, but if you stay for the third horn," her voice trembled, "then you won't get out at all." Her words made no sense. She sounded like some sort of oracle, or maybe she was just a disturbed kid living off the grid. But the mention of a third horn gave me chills. I wanted to press her for details, but she stepped back from me, eyes wide, and whispered, "He's always listening," before running away. I followed for a few yards, calling, "Wait!" but she was gone, as if she'd vanished into thin air. The rest of the morning, I tried to rationalize. Could the black RV be a caretaker or a maniac who wanted to keep me off his property? Maybe the fence sign was a red herring, and the real owners had turned psycho. But how did that explain the weird illusions, the repeating loops, the barefoot girl who vanished at will? By late afternoon, an idea formed. Maybe I was being blocked from leaving in my rig by that black RV or by some trick of the land, but if I left on foot, I might escape. The notion of abandoning my beloved RV, my livelihood, pained me. But after 2 nights of uncanny visits, my survival instincts were kicking in. I decided I'd gather some gear and attempt a trek at first light. That evening, I tried once more to drive out. No luck. Every path led back. Even my footprints in the dust next to the RV's tire tracks seemed to swirl in circles. At sunset, I parked in the clearing again, resigned to one more night. Anxiety gnawed at my insides. I paced for hours, watching the shadows lengthen. The day's heat evaporated, replaced by a stifling stillness. My watch read 8 p.m., then 9 p.m., creeping toward midnight. I dozed off in the driver's seat at some point, exhaustion finally overwhelming me. I woke with a start to the second horn of the night. This time it blared twice in succession, echoing among the trees like a trumpet from some twisted symphony. I scrambled, heart pounding, to peer through the windshield. The black RV was idling just beyond the clearing, as if it had pulled up to my camp like a neighbor dropping by. Its windows were pitch dark, reflecting none of my flashlight beam. I could see a shape in the driver's seat. A tall figure, wearing what looked like black gloves and a dusty black suit. Even in that glimpse, I felt something profoundly wrong, like staring into a void. The engine revved, a low rumble that rattled my chest. Without turning on headlights, the black RV began to circle the clearing. It drove slowly, carving a loop around my campsite, pressing in closer. Once each loop was complete, it would stop, honk a single blast, then drive again. I lost count of how many circles it made, 5, 6, maybe more. My nerves stretched to a breaking point. Should I run, hide, attack? None of these options felt viable. I was watching something that didn't obey normal rules. Finally, it drove off into the woods again, engine rumbling away into silence. I exhaled shakily, my clothes drenched in sweat. I might have collapsed if I wasn't already seated. Delilah's words echoed in my head. You can leave if you walk. You must walk. I resolved that as soon as dawn's first light appeared, I'd do exactly that. I'd take my bag, some water, a flashlight, and enough supplies to last a day or two. I'd find the dry creek bed she mentioned. Anything was better than waiting for a third horn. I waited out the rest of the night in agony. Every twig snap or gust of wind made me jump, expecting that black RV to come roaring back. But it didn't. I think I might have dozed off just before dawn, because I snapped awake to bright sunlight streaming through the windshield. No more horns. No sign of the black RV. Just birds chirping in the distance. It felt almost normal. A surreal calm after the terror of the night. I jumped into action, stuffing a small backpack with water bottles, protein bars, a compact sleeping bag, and my best flashlight. I took my phone, still dead, a map of the region, and a compass that seemed broken but might help if it decided to work again. I scribbled a note, nonsensical probably, to my subscribers, in case anyone ever found my RV. If you see this, call for help. Don't stay here. Then I quietly slipped into the woods. My plan was straightforward. Pick a direction, keep going straight, and trust that eventually I'd find either a fence line or a main road. The problem was that I'd tried that before and kept looping back. But now I intended to push deeper, ignoring any illusions or confusions, trusting muscle memory. Even if it took me days, I would not return to that clearing. Hours passed. The sun rose high, scorching my neck. I trudged through underbrush, stumbling over hidden roots. The only sign of life I found was a few insects and maybe a snake slithering away. Not a single sign of the road or the fence. Eventually, I reached a shallow ravine. The earth had cracked, forming a dry bed maybe 6 feet below ground level. Could this be the dry creek bed Delilah mentioned? Hope fluttered in my chest. I climbed down into the ravine, the dust swirling around my boots. If I followed it, maybe I'd get out. The creek bed wound left, then right, gradually sloping downward. The further I went, the more I saw hints of water stains on the rocks, a sign that in wetter seasons, water actually flowed here. After an hour or two, the ravine walls grew taller, forming a narrow canyon. Oddly, the sun began to fade, as if hidden by clouds. I checked my watch, 2 p.m. The sky above had turned ominously gray. Lightning flashed somewhere. A breeze picked up, swirling dead leaves around my ankles. Then thunder rumbled, echoing off the ravine walls. I was nowhere near shelter. If it stormed, the creek bed could flood, or the ground would become slippery. But I pressed on, determined. The map was no help. It showed no creek bed in this area at all. Still, it felt like I was making progress, at least until I saw something that nearly made me drop my bag in disbelief. Far ahead, where the ravine curved around a bend, was a shape. The shape of an RV, battered and black, half blocking the creek bed. My pulse hammered. It was that same black RV, as if it had somehow threaded through the dense forest to meet me here. I took a few cautious steps forward. The driver's side door was open, but I could see no one inside. The interior was cloaked in shadow. Rain pattered, gathering intensity. The sky flickered with more lightning. A million thoughts raced through my mind. I could try to dash past it, but what if that driver was waiting just around the corner? What if it was a trap? Fear warred with desperation. I gripped my flashlight like a weapon, though in the daylight it was pretty useless. Slowly, I approached the black RV. The door creaked in the wind, swinging back and forth. I peered into the cockpit, heart thudding. The driver's seat was empty, a worn black suit jacket draped over the seat. The floor was littered with old receipts and postcards, all moldy and unreadable. A smell of damp rot wafted out. I couldn't see any license plate or identifying details. The headlights were battered lumps of metal, caked with mud. As I circled around to the back, I noticed faint scratch marks on the side, like something or someone had tried to claw their way in or out. Lightning split the sky again, and thunder crashed. Sheets of rain began cascading into the ravine. Water trickled at my feet, threatening to rise. I had no choice but to move forward, around the black RV. With a pounding heart, I inched along the side, stepping carefully so I wouldn't slip on the wet rock. That's when I heard it. A voice from inside, a chorus of voices actually, all moaning or whispering in unison. I nearly screamed. My foot slipped on wet stone, but I caught myself against the RV's fender. Inside, through a grimy rear window, I thought I saw movement. A swirl of shapes, like pale arms reaching out, then an urgent whisper. "Marty! Marty!" My name, I swear I heard them call my name. I staggered back, terror flooding my veins. Rain pelted my face, mixing with sweat. Adrenaline urged me to run. Gritting my teeth, I forced myself to creep past the rear of the RV. I couldn't see inside properly through the cracked back window. Another flash of lightning illuminated what looked like multiple faces peering out, eyes hollow, mouths open in silent screams. My stomach lurched, and I scrambled away, nearly falling into the rushing water that had begun to pool in the ravine. By the time I cleared the corner, I was outright running, water splashing around my ankles. My chest burned. The ravine twisted, rising, then falling again. For what felt like an eternity, I ran, my lungs screaming, until I finally found a slope that let me scramble onto higher ground. The storm raged around me, lightning streaking overhead, thunder rolling so loudly it shook the earth. At some point, I slipped, lost my bag, and tumbled onto a patch of muddy grass. I couldn't see more than a few feet in front of me. By the time the rain lightened to a drizzle, it must have been late evening, because the world had taken on a dull, grayish hue. My entire body trembled. I took stock. My bag was gone, carried away by the flood or lost in the scramble. I had only the phone in my pocket, still dead, and the small multi-tool clipped to my belt. No water, no food, no map. Despair threatened to swallow me. I was soaked, cold, and half lost in a forest I didn't recognize. Worse, I realized with a sinking dread that I'd ended up near a clearing again. A smaller one, sure, but a clearing nonetheless, with a single, battered structure looming in the center. A gutted camper shell. It was different from the main clearing, but the vibe was the same. Twisted trees, dead silence. A single honk cut through the air, and I swear my heart stopped beating. The third horn. My mind flashed to Delilah's warning. Don't stay for the third horn. Then you won't get out at all. Fear gripped me, so intense it made me want to curl up and weep. But some stubborn part of me refused to give up. Maybe I could slip away, hide, wait this out. Another honk, longer this time, and I saw it. The black RV gliding around the perimeter of the clearing, just inside the tree line. Headlights were off, but I could make out its hulking shape whenever lightning flared above. It circled once, then stopped. The door opened with a soft creak. My breath caught in my throat. A tall figure in a dusty black suit stepped out, wearing a wide-brimmed hat. Even from a distance, I could see his gloved hands. He stood motionless in the drizzle, as if scanning the clearing. Then he reached inside the RV, pulled out a horn. An actual handheld car horn, shaped like the old-timey ones with a rubber bulb. He squeezed it once, producing a mournful wail. A wave of nausea hit me as the sound echoed. I inched backward, trying not to make a sound. My foot snapped a twig, loud as gunfire. The figure's head jerked in my direction. Without any hurry, he stepped forward, the wet ground not impeding him at all. I caught a glimpse of his face in the dying light. Pale skin, hollow cheeks, eyes as dark as an empty night sky. Every hair on my body stood on end. Panicked, I scanned for an escape. The figure was between me and the path I'd come from. Another route led deeper into the woods, but it was choked with brambles. Meanwhile, that black RV loomed, engine idling softly, as if it waited for me. I heard a faint clanging, like chains inside. My mind conjured images of trapped souls rattling around in there. I did the only thing I could think of. I ran to the gutted camper shell in the clearing center. It offered no real protection, just half a metal box with a missing side. But it was something. I dove inside, scraping my elbows on jagged metal. Rain dripped through the holes in the roof. My heart hammered so loudly I was sure it would give me away. Silence. I peered through a rusted gap, searching for movement. A moment later, the figure stepped into view a few yards away, that horn dangling from one gloved hand. He wore no expression. His face was a blank mask, as if it belonged to someone long dead. Every primal instinct in me screamed, "Run, hide, run," but I stayed crouched, hoping he wouldn't see me. Then he began to speak, though speak might not be the right word. A dry whisper emerged from his mouth, like wind over dead leaves. I couldn't understand the language, if it even was a language. Each syllable seemed to grate against reality. I clamped my hands over my ears, trembling. Something about that whisper hammered on my skull, messing with my sense of time and place. It grew louder, and I realized he was chanting. A low, raspy drone that made the air feel heavy, oppressive. The black RV's engine revved softly behind him, creating a dreadful harmony. My vision blurred. For a heartbeat, I saw shapes swirling around him, like pale figures, dozens, maybe hundreds, writhing in the darkness. The chanting stopped abruptly. A stillness fell, the rain halting as if time itself hit pause. Then, he slowly lifted his hand and pressed the horn again. The sound was deafening in the silence, a final call that I feared meant the end of me. My thoughts jumbled, panic screaming through every nerve. Acting on pure desperation, I crawled out the back of the camper shell, away from him. He was fixated on the front opening. I tiptoed around puddles and mud, refusing to look back. All I could think was that I had to put distance between us. The forest might be disorienting and impossible, but it was better than confronting that creature. One foot after another, I made my way behind the shell, then darted into the underbrush. I heard no pursuit at first, just a series of bizarre scraping noises. Then came an explosion of noise, engine roaring, the black RV lurching into motion. He must have climbed back into the driver's seat. Headlights sprang to life for the first time, two beams of sickly yellow sweeping across the clearing. In horror, I realized those lights were pointed straight at me, as if he could see exactly where I was even behind the trees. Branches whipped at my face, thorns clawed my arms, but I forced my legs to keep moving. I no longer had any direction, I just had raw terror fueling me. A new storm of adrenaline pounded in my veins. The engine roared closer, unbelievably close, as though the black RV was bending the terrain to chase me. I risked a glance over my shoulder. Headlights glared, accompanied by the silhouette of that monstrous vehicle, crashing through the trees as if they offered no resistance. Something primal snapped inside me. I realized I would not outrun it forever. The man, if he was a man, could track me anywhere. Delilah's cryptic warning returned. If you drive, he drives too. She'd also said something about leaving my home behind. My RV was my home. A sudden, insane idea bubbled in my head. What if I destroyed my own RV? Would that break whatever link was keeping me here? It sounded like nonsense, but every other plan had failed. Fueled by madness, I reversed direction, weaving between the trees. I'd go back to my rig, set it on fire, do something drastic, anything to sever whatever weird hold this place had on me. The black RV's lights swept after me. I could practically feel its metal bumper at my heels, but I kept moving, stumbling, gasping for breath. Lightning crackled again in the sky, illuminating the twisted pines. The storm was picking up a second wind, raindrops spattering anew. At last, I burst into the main clearing where I'd first camped. My RV stood where I left it, looking strangely innocent under the flicker of lightning. The black RV crashed through the brush behind me, engine screaming like a wounded animal. I clambered into my rig, rummaged in a crazed hurry for anything flammable. My eyes landed on a small propane canister for my stove. I snatched it, grabbed some rags and a lighter, heart pounding so hard I thought I'd faint. Outside, the black RV screeched to a halt, angled so its headlights bore into my windshield. I saw the tall figure inside looming behind the wheel. He honked once, the sound full of mocking. Shaking, I spilled a half-full jerry can of gasoline over the seats and floor of my RV, tears mixing with sweat and rain. My beloved home, the place I'd poured my savings into. But there was no time for regret. I jammed the propane canister under a seat cushion, stuffed rags around it, and flicked my lighter. A small flame licked at the edge of the seat. I dashed out, leaving the door wide open. The fire spread with shocking speed, the gasoline fueling an angry blaze. Thick, black smoke curled out the door, and the heat was instantaneous. I stumbled back, half blinded by tears. Through the whirlwind of flames, I saw the black RV's headlights flicker. The engine sputtered, coughed, The tall driver jerked the steering wheel as if disoriented. A wave of relief, or at least savage triumph, pulsed through me. Maybe this was working. But I wasn't safe yet. The flames erupted in a giant whoosh, engulfing the interior of my RV. The propane canister ignited with a thunderous boom, sending debris flying. The shockwave knocked me off my feet. I landed hard, pain jolting through my shoulder. Fire and smoke blanketed everything in orange and gray. For a terrifying few seconds, I thought I might be caught in the conflagration. But then I managed to crawl away, lungs searing with every breath. Coughing, I looked up in time to see the black RV jerk in place, its engine squealing. The driver hammered the horn repeatedly, short, frantic blasts. The sound crackled with static, warping as if something was distorting reality. Then the headlights dimmed, flickered, and died. Darkness swallowed the clearing, punctuated only by the glow of my burning rig. I staggered to my feet, ignoring the agony in my ribs and shoulder. In that flickering firelight, I glimpsed the black RV slowly backing away, as if retreating. Smoke drifted from its hood. The tall figure was slumped in the driver's seat, shape flickering, fading in and out of my vision. It honked once more, a weak, sputtering cry, then vanished into the darkness, headlights never turning back on. I didn't wait to see if it would return. Summoning what little strength I had, I stumbled into the woods on the far side of the clearing, away from the inferno that had been my home. Every step felt like my last. My body throbbed, exhaustion crashed over me, but adrenaline kept my legs moving. The acrid smell of burning plastic hung in the air, chasing me. I didn't know where I was going. I just prayed it was away from that devouring presence. Eventually, the moon and the flickers of lightning provided enough light for me to pick my way along a rough path. Hours passed in a haze. My watch was shattered. Time had lost all meaning. I pressed on until the trees thinned, the ground leveled, and, in what felt like a cruel prank, I found myself at a real highway. Pale headlights from passing cars illuminated the road every so often. My knees buckled. Relief and disbelief warred in my chest. I collapsed by the shoulder, tears of gratitude burning my eyes. I was out. I was really out. The next thing I remember is a pair of headlights slowing down, a trucker leaning out of his window asking if I needed help. I must have babbled incoherently because he got out, swore at the sight of my burns and torn clothes, and insisted on driving me to the nearest hospital. I drifted in and out of consciousness during that ride, the jostling of the truck, the hum of the road. I expected to see the black RV in the mirror at any second, but it never appeared. At the hospital, doctors treated me for burns, smoke inhalation, and dehydration. The local sheriff's office sent a deputy to ask me questions. I told them a version of the truth, that I'd found an abandoned RV park, gotten lost, and my RV caught fire. I left out the black RV and the tall driver. I was sure they'd think I was delusional, or worse. The next day, a nurse mentioned that no one could find a place called Black Hollow Acres. It wasn't on any official register. The area near the Devil's Backbone was largely privately owned ranch land. The deputy asked me to show him on a map, but I couldn't. My own directions sounded contradictory. They did, however, find the remains of my burned-out RV near a deserted patch of forest, about 3 miles off the main scenic route. The path I described didn't match any real logging road. They chalked it up to me wandering onto private land, though they couldn't figure out how I'd gotten so far in. No one believed me about the barefoot girl named Delilah, or the black-suited driver, or the horns. My camera and electronics were all destroyed in the fire. Even my phone was a charred husk. I had nothing to show for proof. A local volunteer group ventured near the site, but they found no old fence line, no scattered graveyard of RVs. There was some evidence of at least one or two old wrecks decades old, but not an entire park's worth. They wrote it off as me being confused due to my injuries and the chaos of the fire. They said the structures I recalled were likely illusions in the night. When I was discharged, I tried to move on. The insurance claim was a nightmare. Technically, I had no permission to be on that land. My channel, wheels, and wrenches is silent now. I lost most of my gear, and any passion for travel died with my RV. I stay in motels or with acquaintances, picking up odd mechanic jobs. But every night I dream of that black RV, prowling roads that twist endlessly, honking just once or twice to let me know it's there, waiting. Sometimes, when I'm restless, I check Google Maps around the Devil's Backbone, searching satellite images for a battered fence or a half-concealed sign. So far, I've found nothing. Yet, I can't shake the feeling that Black Hollow Acres is still out there, hidden in the folds of reality, waiting to lure in the curious, the reckless, the unsuspecting. And if anyone does wander in, they'd better not stay for the third horn, because once that final call comes, there's no more leaving. That's all I can say. I wish I had a neat moral or a way to tie this up with a hopeful bow. But the only lesson is that sometimes the roads we travel contain darkness beyond comprehension, and ignorance can be our best defense. I learned that the hard way. My name is Marty Blake. I'm 36. This happened in July of 2025, and I still don't know if I escaped with my soul intact or if I left part of it behind in the Devil's Mile. My name is Sarah Harper. I'm 29 years old, and this happened in October of 2024. I've replayed these events in my mind 1,000 times, trying to find some logical explanation for what we experienced in the heart of Sam Houston National Forest, an isolated stretch of woodland known ominously as the Hollow. Every time I think about it, my skin crawls, and the hairs on the back of my neck prickle, as if the forest itself is still watching me. This story is my attempt to lay out everything that happened, but I can't promise it will make sense. Because even now, I'm not entirely sure what was real and what was some feverish nightmare brought on by that cursed place. My friends and I had planned the trip months in advance. It was supposed to be a weekend getaway, a chance to reconnect with nature and each other. The group consisted of 4: myself, Ben Lawson, a 30, my old college friend with whom I share a complicated history, Olivia Turner, Liv, 27, one of my closest friends and a passionate photographer who brought along her loyal dog Rusty, and Jack Porter, 32, quiet, introspective, a friend of a friend who was supposedly experienced in backwoods hiking. I had needed a break from my life in Houston. My recent breakup was messy and left me feeling like I had to find myself again. When Liv suggested a camping trip, I didn't hesitate. The Hollow wasn't on most maps. It was a place we'd heard about through hushed stories at local outdoor shops. "Don't camp there," the owners would say. "People get lost," or "strange things happen in that section of Sam Houston." The warnings felt half-hearted, almost superstitious. We figured it was the typical local lore that kept away casual tourists. For the 4 of us, it sounded like the perfect place to get off grid and leave our worries behind. The drive took nearly 3 hours from Houston. As we left the highway and hit dirt roads, civilization vanished behind us. I remember the tension in the air when we first turned onto a narrow, winding path leading deeper into the forest. The trees were tall, twisted in places, their branches casting elongated shadows. Pockets of dense foliage blocked out the sun, making it feel later in the day than it actually was. My phone was already losing signal, the battery draining unnaturally fast, which I chalked up to spotty coverage. "Looks like there's no service out here," Ben announced, trying to keep the mood light. He was driving, leaning forward over the wheel as if that would help see around the next bend. "Hey, that's what we wanted, right?" I replied with a bit too much enthusiasm. I glanced at Liv in the back seat. She offered me a supportive smile, but I could see her brow furrowed in concern. Eventually, we found a small clearing where we could park. We grabbed our gear, tents, sleeping bags, cooking supplies, and locked up the car. Jack took the lead on the trail, rustling a folded map from his back pocket. At first, everything felt normal. The crisp October air smelled of pine and damp earth, and sunlight filtered through the canopy in warm, inviting beams. It felt like a classic autumn camping trip, the kind you look forward to all year. Yet, as we went deeper, the forest seemed to change. The path twisted in impossible ways, leading us in circles. Rusty kept stopping, ears perked as if hearing something we couldn't. Liv tried to take photos of strange tree formations, but her camera randomly froze, or produced images streaked with bizarre colors that shouldn't have been there. Ben joked that we were in the twilight zone, but the laughter never quite reached his eyes. An hour later, we arrived at a natural hollow, a wide, bowl-shaped depression in the land surrounded by towering pines and oaks. A thin stream trickled at the edge. It appeared like the perfect campsite. We set up 2 tents, one for Ben and Jack, and one for Liv, Rusty, and me. By the time we finished, the sun was dipping behind the tree line, casting everything in a hazy orange glow. Ben tried to start a campfire, but the wood refused to light. We'd collected plenty of dry kindling, and the tinder should have caught easily, but every spark fizzled in seconds. At first, we thought the wood was wet, but it wasn't. Eventually, after about 40 minutes of frustration, Jack managed to get a small flame going. Oddly, the smoke drifted straight upward, perfectly vertical, as if no breeze touched it. We took turns warming our hands, uneasy silence settling in. I remember how the shadows lengthened in unnatural ways across the forest floor. As twilight turned to night, the atmosphere weighed heavily on us. We made some dinner using a portable camping stove, simple pasta and canned sauce. Even Rusty seemed nervous, occasionally growling at the darkness beyond the ring of light. I tried to shake the feeling of being watched, attributing it to my tired, overactive imagination. At some point, we noticed all our phones were dead. Not just out of signal, but drained to 0. Liv muttered that hers had been at 80% just an hour earlier. Jack tapped his phone's power button repeatedly, hoping for any sign of life. Nothing. We decided to ignore it. After all, we came out here to unplug, right? Ben forced a laugh. "Guess we're really on our own now," he said. And for a second, I could almost believe it was just another camping trip. We spent the evening telling stories, mostly comedic ones from college or from past hikes, but none of us could maintain the lightheartedness for long. We turned in early, thinking rest would do us good. I must have drifted off to the rustling of the trees. My dreams were fragmented, filled with a sense of suffocation. When I woke up, the forest was silent. No wind, no insects, no calls of nocturnal animals. The only sound was Rusty's low whine. I flicked on my flashlight and scanned the tent. Liv was still beside me, but her sleeping bag was unzipped and empty. At first, I panicked, thinking she had gone missing. Then I realized she was lying half out of the bag, curled up like she had rolled away from it in her sleep. Still, it was peculiar. The bag itself was open all the way down, from the inside, as if someone had deliberately undone the zipper. Rusty stared at me, ears pinned back, teeth bared. Morning light crept in, gray and cold. Outside, Ben and Jack were already up, fiddling with the map. Their expressions were grim. I crawled out of the tent and approached them. "Everything okay?" I asked. Ben ran a hand through his short, dark hair. "The map. It doesn't make sense." We followed this path. He tapped a trail marked in pencil, but according to the terrain, we should be over here. He pointed to a location that was miles away from our parked car. Jack huffed a breath. We only walked for an hour or so. There's no way we could be that far off. He folded the map as if shutting it would end the argument. Liv emerged from the tent looking disheveled. "Sarah, did you—" She paused, noticing the tension. "Did you hear anything last night?" I shook my head. "Just strange dreams." "You?" She nodded slowly. "I kept seeing—" It's hard to explain. It was like the trees were alive and talking, but in some garbled language. Then I woke up and realized my bag was open. I don't remember doing that. We tried not to let the weirdness get to us. For breakfast, we ate granola bars and fruit. I offered Rusty a can of dog food, but he barely touched it, sniffing and growling as though something in the air frightened him. Afterward, we decided to explore the area and gather more firewood, hoping to find a better vantage point. The plan was to reorient ourselves, confirm our location, and, if needed, hike back to the car to see if we'd made a wrong turn. Liv, Ben, and I went searching for firewood around the perimeter of our campsite, while Jack announced he was going to check out the nearby stream to see if there was an easier route to follow downstream. We agreed to regroup in an hour. We didn't make it far. Every time we moved away from camp, the dense trees closed in, labyrinth-like. What should have been a straightforward walk ended up twisting us back to the hollow, almost as if the forest was warping around us. Ben tried to record our path using an old-fashioned compass, but the needle spun erratically. Within 15 minutes, we were back by our tents, arms filled with barely enough wood to keep a campfire going another night. Liv's dog refused to leave the clearing. Rusty would bark and tug on her pant leg any time she tried to coax him further into the trees. We waited another hour for Jack, but he didn't return. Anxiety built with each passing minute. Finally, we decided to go look for him along the stream. We followed the soft trickle of water, moving carefully through tangles of brush. After a few hundred yards, we found his footprints in a patch of mud, heading east. We followed them until they vanished abruptly. No sign of a struggle, no sign of turning back, just footprints that led to nowhere. "Jack!" Ben shouted, voice echoing in the silence. No response. We searched for another half hour, calling his name repeatedly, until at last we heard a faint voice from deeper in the forest. It sounded like Jack, but there was an odd echo to it. We sprinted toward the sound, hearts pounding, guided by the occasional rustling of bushes. We found Jack standing in a small clearing, facing away from us. The sun filtered through the branches, illuminating motes of dust that danced around him. He was staring up at the canopy, eyes wide. "Jack!" I called, stepping closer. He didn't turn. Liv tugged my arm, a trembling motion of warning. Ben cautiously approached him. "Hey, buddy," Ben said. We were worried. Still no reaction. Then Jack turned, slowly, as though every muscle in his body was stiff. His eyes were unfocused. A small smile curled at the corners of his lips, too wide, and he didn't blink for an unnerving length of time. "You okay, Jack?" I asked. "We've been looking everywhere for you." He blinked once, but said nothing. His gaze slid past me, focusing on something behind us. Then, in a hoarse voice, he muttered, "The forest. It's alive. It knows us." He turned his attention to me, finally locking eyes. "Sarah, we should leave." Relief washed over me. "Yes, absolutely. Let's go back to camp, pack up." He cut me off with a laugh, a hollow, unsettling sound. "It won't let us," he said. "Don't you feel it? Time's all wrong here. I walked for hours, but you say it was only an hour." Ben and Liv exchanged looks. I reached out, intending to put a comforting hand on Jack's shoulder. He jerked away, grin fading, and a flicker of anger flashed in his eyes. Before any of us could react, he took off running. Deeper into the woods, we scrambled after him, but the terrain was treacherous. Vines and undergrowth snagged our legs, and we tripped repeatedly, cutting our hands on sharp branches. By the time we freed ourselves, Jack was gone. We searched until dusk approached, worried about losing our bearings. Liv insisted we return to camp before dark. Back at camp, panic started to set in. The entire day was spent in fruitless searching. Rusty refused to leave Liv's side, letting out low whines. Darkness crept in too quickly, the sun vanishing behind twisted trunks. We built a fire with the little wood we'd managed to collect and sat around it, hugging our knees, each of us lost in our own fearful thoughts. Ben tried to lighten the mood by making jokes about us telling ghost stories, but his voice trembled. Liv was frantic, whispering about the warped pictures in her camera. She tried to show them to us, but the camera wouldn't turn on anymore. We decided to ration our remaining supplies. Canned goods, a bit of dehydrated food, some trail mix, since we had no idea how long it might be until we found Jack or left this cursed place. Night enveloped us in oppressive silence. We sat, occasionally calling Jack's name into the trees. No answer. Eventually, exhaustion overcame fear. We settled into the tents with Ben and I in one, Liv and Rusty in the other, hoping we'd somehow figure things out at daybreak. Sleep was restless. I jolted awake at intervals, hearing faint whispers on the wind. At one point, I was sure I heard Jack's voice near the tents, but when I unzipped the flap, there was nothing but the quiet hush of leaves. Morning came with a bizarre, pale sunlight that seemed too bright yet cast no warmth. My wristwatch read 7 a.m., but it felt like midday. Once again, we discovered something disturbing. Liv's sleeping bag was unzipped from the inside, and this time, she was lying halfway out of it in a stiff, contorted position, eyes wide open but unseeing. I shook her gently, calling her name until she gasped and jerked upright, as if ripping herself out of a nightmare. She clung to me, tears in her eyes. "I dreamed I was buried alive in the roots of a giant tree," she said, voice trembling. I felt the dirt in my mouth, Sarah." Ben emerged from the other tent looking disheveled and pale. He said he felt like he hadn't slept at all. Rusty was unusually quiet, tail between his legs, trembling whenever he got more than a few feet from Liv. Trying to gather ourselves, we discovered yet another unnerving detail. Our backpacks were missing. The tent flaps were still secured, but the bags we'd left near the entrance had vanished. All our supplies, food, water filters, the remaining gear, gone. We tore through the campsite, searching every corner, but found only scattered scraps of fabric from one of the bag's linings. Ben's anger flared. First Jack disappears, now our stuff gets stolen? Is someone messing with us? Liv bit her lip. It doesn't make sense. There's no one else out here. Even more peculiar, some of our supplies were left behind in disarray. Cans of food half-rotted overnight, as though they'd been sitting out for weeks. One water bottle was thick with algae. It felt like we'd been in the forest for much longer than 2 days, yet the timeline was impossible. That morning, we decided we couldn't wait for Jack any longer. We had to get out, find help, then return with a search party. Liv was a wreck, but she agreed, torn between wanting to find Jack and the nagging sense that something was deeply wrong about staying. We packed what little remained, some rope, a pocket knife, a first aid kit that had spilled out of a shredded backpack, and set off in what we believed to be the direction of the car. At first, the path was familiar, but within minutes we were plunged into an ever-shifting maze of trees. Liv tried to mark our path with strips of cloth tied to branches. Each time we paused to look back, the cloths seemed further away than they should have been, as if the forest was distorting distances or simply swallowing our markers. Ben grew increasingly agitated. He kept cursing under his breath, checking the useless compass. I tried to stay calm, but the claustrophobia of the place dug into me like needles. Time became unhinged. We'd walk for what felt like hours, only to look at my watch and see that barely 30 minutes had passed. Then the opposite would happen. We'd think only a short while had passed, but the watch showed 2 hours gone. Eventually, we came across a shallow stream that I recognized vaguely from the day before. We followed it, hoping it would lead us out, or at least back to a known landmark. Rusty, who had been lagging behind, started barking furiously. In the distance, across the stream, I saw Jack standing near the water's edge. My heart soared with relief, but the feeling didn't last. He looked wrong. His clothes were torn, and his skin was paler, almost translucent. When I called his name, he whipped around. A twisted smile spread across his face. Liv gasped, gripping my arm. Jack started laughing, an eerie, echoing sound that made no sense in the quiet forest. Then, in a rapid motion, he lunged forward, crossing the stream in impossibly long strides. The water only rose to his knees, but he moved like it was barely there. We scrambled back. Rusty bared his teeth, barking, but the dog took no steps forward. Jack froze a few feet away from us, chest heaving. His eyes flicked from me to Ben to Liv. "You left me," he snarled. "No, Jack, we were looking for you," I stammered. He shook his head violently, that grin returning. "The forest showed me things. It told me you don't belong here. You were always going to leave me behind." My gut twisted in fear. Something about Jack's voice was off, layered with an echo that didn't match his mouth movements. Ben tried to step in front of me protectively. "Jack, we can fix this. Just come with us," he said, hands raised in a placating gesture. Jack's gaze shifted to Ben, eyes wide and furious. In a flash, he lunged, tackling Ben to the ground with inhuman strength. They rolled over rocks and roots, fists swinging. Liv screamed, urging Rusty to help, but the dog only circled, barking frantically, reluctant to sink its teeth into a man it once knew. I rushed over, trying to pull Jack off Ben, but he flung me aside like I was weightless. I slammed into a tree, pain blossoming in my shoulder. Before I could recover, Jack pinned Ben's arms and raised a large rock overhead. A moment of pure horror swept through me. Ben's eyes were wide with fear, and Jack's face was a mask of rage. But in that second, he seemed to hesitate. The rock hovered, shaking in his grip. Then his expression contorted into something almost like sorrow, and he dropped the rock, stumbling backward. I scrambled to Ben's side. He was battered, bleeding from a head wound, but conscious. Jack stood above us, trembling, his face switching between anger and confusion. For an instant, I thought I saw the real Jack, the one we knew, break through the madness. "Leave," he whispered, tears in his eyes. Then he turned and darted back across the stream, disappearing into the thickening mist. The forest swallowed him once more. We were in shock, adrenaline coursing through our veins. Liv helped me get Ben to his feet. We washed his cuts in the stream. The water was frigid, stinging our hands. Ben kept repeating, "He almost killed me." I had no answer. We stood there, arms shaking, heads spinning, trying to process the unbelievable scene we'd just witnessed. As we debated what to do next, the sky dimmed rapidly, despite my watch claiming it was only mid-afternoon. A chill wind rustled the leaves. We had no tent, no supplies other than the basics, and the forest felt more hostile than ever. With no realistic option to find our way out in the dark, we decided to head back to our original campsite. Maybe, we reasoned, we'd at least have some shelter there. The return journey took an impossibly short time. It felt like we walked for only 20 minutes before we stumbled back into the hollow. The place looked unchanged. Tents still pitched, the remnants of our failed fire. Yet, the sense of dread was more pronounced, as if the forest exhaled malice in every gust of wind. Liv and I helped Ben into the tent he shared with Jack, since it was larger. We laid him on a sleeping bag, and she began cleaning and bandaging his head wound. I stepped outside to gather more firewood, determined not to let darkness overtake us without light. Rusty followed me, ears perked, but he kept whimpering. We moved around the perimeter of the clearing, grabbing any fallen branches. I tried to keep my mind focused on the task at hand. Gather wood, keep the fire going, survive the night. But a nagging sense of panic hovered over me. Jack was out there, possessed or changed somehow, and the forest was warping time, space, and our very sanity. An hour later, night had truly arrived, with a moon so bright it cast eerie shapes on the ground. We finally managed to coax a fire to life, though it burned with strange, faintly colored flames, shifts of greenish hue that danced at the edges. Liv sat close to Ben, who had drifted into a fitful sleep, occasionally mumbling about the trees and gaps in time. I offered Liv some water from the single bottle that hadn't turned foul overnight. She sipped it gratefully. Rusty settled at her feet, occasionally perking up to growl at the darkness. We spoke in hushed voices, afraid to alert whatever was lurking beyond the firelight. "How do we fix this?" Liv asked quietly. "Jack's possessed, or maybe delirious. How do we get him back?" I stared at the flickering flames. "I don't know. Right now, we have to make sure we survive until we can get help." Liv nodded, wiping tears from her cheeks. She glanced at the dog. "Rusty's the only one who seems to understand how wrong this place is. He won't let me go more than a few steps away from him." A sudden rustling in the brush made us both jump. My pulse thundered. We peered into the darkness, half expecting Jack to appear again. Instead, a silent hush returned. After a tense moment, we resumed our vigil by the fire. Eventually, exhaustion overcame us. Ben was still unconscious, so Liv and I decided we'd take turns staying awake. I let her rest first while I kept watch, stoking the fire to keep it alive. Time dragged. The forest whispered, soft voices that slipped through the branches, sounding almost human but impossible to trace. Now and then I thought I heard my own name drifting in the wind. After a few hours, Liv stirred, taking my place while I crawled into the other tent. I lay on top of the sleeping bag, too on edge to climb into it. My thoughts drifted to Jack's face, the unnatural grin. I shuddered at the memory of how he almost killed Ben. Sleep finally crept in. A restless, haunted slumber. I awoke to screams in the dead of night. Bolting upright, I fumbled for my flashlight, heart pounding. It was pitch black inside the tent, except for faint flickers of dying firelight that cast bizarre shadows. I stumbled outside, nearly tripping over the tent's threshold. Liv was on the ground, thrashing, tangled in the rope we'd used earlier. Her eyes were wild, and Rusty was barking incessantly. I rushed to her, trying to free her. She was shaking so violently I could hardly get the rope off. Once I did, she clung to me, tears staining her cheeks. Ben was still in the other tent, but I could hear him moaning in pain. When I checked on him, he was tossing and turning, delirious. Then I noticed something horrifying. The entire side of his sleeping bag was wet with dark stains. It looked like muddy water or thick sap, but the odor was sickly sweet, almost rotten. "What happened?" I asked Liv, struggling to keep my voice calm. She shook her head. I don't know. I saw something move near the edge of camp. Rusty ran after it, then I blacked out, felt like someone grabbed me, dragged me around. I woke up on the ground, tied in rope. I don't know how it happened. We examined her arms. Red welts and cuts marred her skin as if she'd been pulled through brambles. There were no footprints, no sign of an intruder. My mind reeled with possibilities. Was it Jack? Was it something else entirely? Then Ben let out a hoarse cry, jerking upright. He grabbed my arm, nails digging into my flesh. "Don't let it in," he muttered through clenched teeth. "Don't let the forest in." Liv tried to soothe him, but he lurched sideways, eyes rolling back. A rush of fear gripped me. Was he possessed, like Jack? His breathing grew ragged, and he spat out a mouthful of that foul-smelling fluid. Panicked, we tried to wipe it away, but his entire body convulsed. For a moment, I thought he was going to die right in front of us. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the seizure stopped. His eyes fluttered shut, and he fell limp against the sleeping bag. I placed an ear to his chest. His heartbeat was erratic, but still present. Liv sat back, tears in her eyes. "This is insane," she whispered. "We need a doctor." I nodded, feeling numb. But how? We're lost in this damned place, and we can't even find our own tracks. Outside, the fire had died down to embers. I stood, intending to rekindle it. Rusty followed me, whining softly. The forest beyond our little clearing loomed, pitch black and endless. I crouched near the fire pit, rummaging for the lighter. An unsettling sensation prickled the back of my neck, like I was being watched. A quiet voice, barely audible, whispered my name from the tree line. "Sarah?" I froze, turning slowly. There, at the edge of the clearing, was a shape. My flashlight beam revealed Jack, or something wearing Jack's face. His clothes were torn, skin streaked with mud. He stood motionless, eyes locked on me with that same unblinking stare. My heart hammered. I wanted to yell, to call for Liv, but fear paralyzed me. Jack stepped closer. I could see the veins beneath his skin, black lines that crisscrossed his arms and neck. His mouth opened and he whispered, "I'm sorry." I swallowed, forcing the words out. "Jack, can you hear me?" His head twitched at an odd angle. "The Hollow wants you. It wants all of us." He paused, then whispered, "You can still leave, but not all of you." Before I could respond, Rusty charged, barking furiously. Jack hissed, a genuinely inhuman sound, and sprinted back into the forest, merging with the darkness. My body trembled as I tried to process what I'd just witnessed. It took me a long moment to snap out of it and realize I had to get the fire going again. I fumbled with the lighter, finally coaxing the flames back to life. Liv emerged from the tent, checking on me. I told her Jack had been here, that he spoke to me. "He said we can still leave, but not all of us," I muttered, voice shaking. She glanced at the tent where Ben lay unconscious. Then, "We need to go now," she said firmly. "We'll carry Ben if we have to." I nodded. "I'll get our things." We decided the best plan was to wait for the first hint of daylight. Maybe we could find some path that led us back to the car. The rest of the night passed in terrifying anticipation. We stayed close to the fire, each minute dragging on like an hour, each rustle in the forest making us jump. Neither of us slept. When faint light finally colored the sky, we helped Ben out of the tent. He was feverish, weak, and kept muttering nonsense about the trees and missing time. We supported him between us, stumbling out of the hollow. We tried to retrace our original route, using the pale sunlight to orient ourselves. Liv clutched her camera, even though it wouldn't turn on anymore. She said she wanted to keep it close because it had pictures, proof in case we ever made it out. Hours passed as we trudged through the forest, the undergrowth snagging our clothes, branches tearing at our skin. Rusty led the way at times, sniffing, but even he seemed unsure. The deeper we went, the more I felt reality unravel. The shadows under the trees loomed too dark for morning. The temperature shifted from cold to sweltering, then back again. A headache pounded behind my eyes. Ben collapsed around midday. His lips were pale, body trembling. We stopped by a stump to let him rest. Liv handed him water, which he sipped listlessly. I glanced around, disoriented. My watch said it was nearly noon, but the sky looked like early evening. Then, in the distance, I spotted something that made my stomach drop. A dilapidated cabin, half hidden by thick vines and moss. We'd never seen any mention of a cabin on the map, but at this point, I doubted any map of this area was accurate. Liv and I exchanged a look. We could either keep wandering or take our chances investigating the cabin. Maybe there would be something inside that could help us. A radio, supplies, anything. With Ben leaning heavily on our shoulders, we made our way toward the cabin. The door hung loosely on rusted hinges, the wood gray with age. Inside, the air was stagnant, thick with the smell of decay. Dust motes drifted in beams of weak light filtering through cracks in the walls. We set Ben on a rickety chair. He groaned, gripping his stomach. Liv explored the single room, discovering shelves filled with old tins, all rusted shut, and a broken lantern. There was a stone fireplace on one side, and a narrow bed frame missing its mattress on the other. As I searched near the fireplace, I noticed dark stains on the floorboards, an irregular pattern that could have been old blood. My heart raced. Rusty sniffed the air, whining softly. I tried not to think about who might have lived here or died here. Suddenly, Ben screamed. I spun around to see him convulsing in the chair, eyes rolling back. Liv rushed to him, but he threw his head back and expelled a chilling, guttural noise. His body spasmed violently, and blackish fluid spewed from his mouth, spattering across the floor. My stomach lurched at the sight and stench. He stopped seizing, mouth slack, eyes half-lidded. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then, in a raspy voice that wasn't quite his own, Ben said, "It's hungry." Liv cried out, pressing her palm against his forehead. He was burning up. "We have to help him," she pleaded. "I don't know how," I replied, trembling. "There's nothing here. No meds, no phone, nothing." Ben's eyes snapped open, and he grabbed Liv's wrist with bone-crushing strength. She screamed as he twisted her arm, forcing her to the floor. Rusty barked and lunged, but Ben kicked at the dog, knocking him back. I tried to pull him off Liv, but he shoved me so hard that I slammed into the wall, stars exploding in my vision. When I recovered, I saw that Ben had pinned Liv to the floor, drool mingled with that foul black fluid dripping from his lips. His eyes glowed with a deranged light. "The forest wants sacrifice," he said, voice echoing unnaturally. I lunged at him, managing to wrap my arm around his neck in a chokehold. He thrashed violently, but I used all my body weight to drag him off her. Liv rolled away, gasping for breath. With an agonized cry, Ben threw me off again, but this time I managed to hold on to a piece of broken chair leg. When he came at me, I struck him in the side of the head. A sickening crack echoed in the cabin, and he collapsed. I crawled over to Liv, who stared at me with terror and relief. We both looked at Ben's lifeless body in shock. I touched his neck, feeling for a pulse. Nothing. My friend was gone, his head twisted at an impossible angle. Tears flooded my eyes. I'd just killed him, but was that even him anymore? Liv broke down, sobbing into her hands. Rusty nosed at Ben's arm, whining softly. My heart hammered as I tried to catch my breath. We had lost Jack, and now Ben was dead. And I had done it. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't make a sound. We stayed in that cabin for hours, maybe days. Time had no meaning anymore. Liv and I were in shock, paralyzed by grief and exhaustion. We left Ben's body where it lay because we didn't know what else to do. Neither of us had the strength to bury him physically or emotionally. At some point, I heard scratching at the cabin door. Liv and I exchanged fearful looks. Rusty growled, standing protectively in front of us. The scratching persisted, light at first, then more forceful. Finally, the door creaked open a fraction. Through the gap, I could see Jack's face, pale and contorted. "Sarah," he whispered, that odd double voice returning. "Liv." We were too shocked to move. Jack pushed the door open wider, stepping inside cautiously. His eyes flicked to Ben's body on the floor. An almost sad expression crossed his features. Then he looked back at me. "We didn't have to lose him," Jack said, stepping closer. I backed away, heart in my throat. "The forest gave me a choice. It can still give you one too." "What choice?" I asked, voice trembling. He stretched out a hand, a blackish liquid seeping from his fingertips. "Join us. Become part of the hollow." A cruel smile spread across his face. "Or die." Liv stood still trembling. "Jack," she said softly, "you're sick. We can help." He roared, an animalistic sound that shook the cabin walls. Rusty barked and lunged. Jack caught Rusty by the scruff, hurling the dog against the fireplace. A pained yelp tore through the air. Liv screamed and ran to the dog's side. Fury fueled me. I grabbed the broken chair leg again. Jack turned, noticing me too late. I swung with all my might, hitting his shoulder and hearing a crunch. He snarled, black veins pulsing in his neck. He slammed his fist into my stomach, driving the air from my lungs. Gasping, I staggered, vision wavering. From behind Jack, Liv sprang forward, brandishing a piece of shattered glass from a window. She drove it into his back, and he howled, stumbling forward. I gritted my teeth, ignoring my pain, and struck again, this time at his knees. With a sickening snap, he collapsed. Even then, he tried to crawl, leaving a trail of oily fluid. His eyes burned with hatred. "You can't stop it," he hissed. "The hollow is everywhere." Liv and I locked eyes. She trembled, but I could see the resolve in her. As one, we lifted the largest chunk of broken wood and brought it down on Jack. He twitched, struggling weakly, then went still. An unearthly wail echoed through the forest, as if the trees themselves were screaming in protest. We sank to the floor, arms around each other, sobbing. Rusty whimpered, dragging himself toward us. Liv cradled him carefully, tears streaming down her face. The cabin was silent but for our ragged breathing. Eventually, something in me snapped back to survival. If we stayed here, we'd die. The forest wanted us broken, or possessed, or worse. We had to find a way out. Liv, exhausted and wounded, nodded in agreement when I told her we should leave immediately, injuries and all. The sun was setting, or rising, I couldn't tell, by the time we forced ourselves to stand, battered but determined. We stepped outside the cabin, blinking in what felt like too bright sunlight. The trees loomed, oppressive as ever. The air tasted wrong, metallic, tinged with rot. I supported Liv, who held Rusty in her arms. His breathing was shallow, but he was alive. We staggered away from that cursed structure. For what felt like days, we wandered, searching for any landmark we recognized. At times, we heard rustling behind us, glimpsed figures at the edge of our vision. More illusions, or victims of the forest's curse, like Jack. We pressed on, driven by the faint hope that somewhere beyond this twisted realm, a normal world still existed. My watch was useless, stuck on a time that never changed. The sky cycled through weird hues, from bruised purple to glaring red. At times, the forest seemed to echo with laughter or screams. impossible to tell which. Once, we thought we saw Ben's figure stumbling among the trees, but it vanished when we blinked. Finally, we came upon a small slope. At the bottom lay a dirt road. I couldn't believe my eyes. We slid down, half falling, hearts pounding with a wild mix of relief and terror. The moment our feet hit that road, it was like a weight lifted. Though my fear remained, it felt less suffocating. In the distance, we spotted my car, parked exactly where we left it. Relief so overwhelming it almost knocked me to my knees, coursed through me. Liv and I hurried over, still supporting Rusty. My keys were still in my pocket, thank God, and I prayed the car still had some battery left. We piled in. The engine sputtered, but finally roared to life. We tore down the dirt road, not caring if we dented the car on the potholes or brush. We just needed to get away. After a few tense minutes, we reached the main road. Civilization. My phone was still dead, but just seeing paved asphalt was enough to loosen the knot in my chest. Liv sobbed quietly in the passenger seat, cradling Rusty. His breathing was more even now, but his eyes remained half closed. We reached a gas station after about 30 minutes. It was late evening, or maybe morning. The clock on the station's neon sign read 8:12, though I had no idea if it was day or night. We rushed inside, frantic, disheveled, scaring the lone cashier half to death. I asked to use the phone, my voice shaky. We called an ambulance, told them we'd been attacked by animals in the forest. We left out the rest. There was no point in trying to explain. Liv collapsed from exhaustion before the ambulance arrived. Rusty barked weakly, tail thumping once against the floor. I could barely stand, the world swaying around me. The paramedics came, loaded Liv on a stretcher, and gently took Rusty from her arms. I stood outside, leaning against the ambulance, numb. A deputy sheriff asked me questions, but my answers must have sounded delirious. He asked if there were any others still in the forest. I stared at him, tears filling my eyes, and mumbled something incoherent. He shook his head, scribbling notes. I wish I could say we got closure. That an official search party went in, found Ben and Jack's remains, uncovered the sinister truths of the Hollow, but there was never a proper explanation. A few rangers searched the immediate vicinity where we said we'd camped. They found no cabin, no hollow, just an overgrown section of forest that didn't match our descriptions. The entire area was apparently relatively safe, according to them. They implied we might have gotten lost and panicked, our memories unreliable from dehydration or stress. Liv spent weeks in the hospital. Her wounds were explained away as typical camping misfortunes, scrapes and bruises from a fall. She refused to talk about it, eventually moving out of state. We kept in touch at first, but every conversation reminded us of what we'd lost. Rusty survived but never fully recovered from his injuries or the trauma. He had spells where he'd stare into corners, growling. As for me, I tried going back to normal life. But every time I close my eyes, I see Jack's twisted smile, or Ben lying on that cabin floor. I can still feel the forest inside me, like a splinter under my skin. Sometimes at night, I hear the faint whisper of the Hollow calling my name, inviting me back, promising to finish what it started. No one believes the story, and I don't blame them. If it hadn't happened to me, I wouldn't believe it either. But that doesn't change what I know. Something is wrong in Sam Houston National Forest. The Hollow, or whatever it truly is, still lurks there, bending time, devouring souls. We made it out, Liv, Rusty and I, but we didn't escape unscathed. Part of us never left that cursed place. I still check the mirror every morning, half expecting to see black veins tracing my skin. At times, I lose hours or see shadows that have no source. Then the voices come, distant and echoing, reminding me that the Hollow isn't done with me. I don't know if it ever will be. My name is Sarah Harper. I'm 29 years old. This happened in October of 2024, and I still don't know if any of us truly survived. My name is Lena Davis. I'm 25 years old. This happened in September of 2024, and even now, recalling everything that took place makes my skin crawl. I've tried to convince myself it was a nightmare, a vivid delusion fueled by stress and lack of sleep. But I know better. I can still feel the weight of those dark pines pressing in on me whenever I close my eyes. This is my story, and I'll tell it exactly as I remember it, down to every scream, every look, and every moment I realized how fragile our hold on reality can be. I first heard about the place locals called the Hollow's Embrace from Chris Johnson, a quiet, thoughtful friend of mine. He was 28, and we'd met through a local hiking group a few months earlier. Chris was fascinated by history and folklore, sometimes obsessively so, and he'd found references to this isolated region in the Texas Hill Country. According to his research, the Hollow's Embrace was an area thick with superstition and rumors about hikers disappearing under strange circumstances. There were secondhand tales about an ancient spirit or entity that supposedly roamed those woods. Initially, I dismissed it as just another campfire legend. I'm not the sort to obsess over ghosts or demons. But Chris's eyes shone with excitement when he told us about it, and I couldn't help catching a bit of his enthusiasm. I worked a stressful job as a graphic designer, and the idea of unplugging for a few days in nature, no notifications, no deadlines, sounded perfect. My friend Evan Harris, who's 26, jumped on board immediately. He was the adventurous type, always seeking adrenaline, always trying to push himself beyond the boundaries of reason. Our other friend, Maya Williams, was a little more skeptical. She's 24, logical to a fault, and not one to buy into tales of haunted forests. Still, she agreed to come along. Maybe she wanted to test her own bravery, or maybe she just wanted a break from the daily grind. We planned to spend 3 nights in those woods. We packed enough supplies, food, water, camping gear, to survive a week, just in case something went wrong. We'd made sure to bring our phones and a GPS device for navigation, but the place was reputed to be so remote that we anticipated losing signal shortly after entering the area. Chris also brought an old map he'd found in an archive, dotted with intriguing notes about caves, hidden streams, and peculiar rock formations. He was certain we'd find some trace of a larger mystery out there, something that would prove the existence of these eerie legends. We drove out on a Friday morning. The September sun beamed down on the dusty roads, and the land grew increasingly desolate the farther we traveled from any major town. Oaks and mesquite trees framed the winding roads, then gave way to denser forest. By the time we reached the trailhead, our cell phone signals were weak or non-existent. My phone went from 2 bars to 1 bar to no service in the span of 20 minutes. "We'll try the GPS," Evan suggested, fiddling with the handheld device. It beeped, recalculating, then froze. He frowned, powering it off and back on again. The second time it booted up, it drew a blank, as if we were in a location that didn't exist on any satellite map. "Strange," Maya muttered. "It's like the GPS is malfunctioning." "It's not impossible," Chris chimed in, always the calm observer. "The signals can get spotty in dense forest. We'll just use the map and compass." We parked the car off the dusty service road, hoisted our packs onto our shoulders, and set off along a narrow trail. The sign marking this path read, in faded letters, Trail 7A, unmaintained. A few paces in, we passed a battered wooden plaque that warned of rough terrain, venomous snakes, and other hazards. One line stood out: "Enter at your own risk." The old wood had an ominous quality I couldn't ignore. At first, it felt like any typical hike, just 4 friends bantering, sweat trickling down our necks in the Texas heat. The forest gradually thickened, the canopy blocking out more and more sunlight, until the world around us took on a dusky glow. The trail twisted around large outcroppings of rock, and the vegetation grew tangled, suffocating. After a few hours of steady trekking, we found a clearing that Chris declared perfect for making our campsite. We set up 2 tents. Chris and Evan would share one, Maya and I would share the other. I remember feeling a small prickle of unease as I unrolled my sleeping bag. Perhaps it was the claustrophobic hush of the pines, or maybe the stories Chris had told us on the drive. The campfire we lit crackled weakly, the flames darting in and out of existence as though the wood was damp, even though it was bone dry. We did manage to get the fire going after some effort, yet the color of the flames was off. Normally, a fire glows yellow, orange, red. This one flickered with brief shades of green and blue, as if some chemical was burning. We rationalized it. Maybe there was copper or some mineral in the wood. Regardless, none of us said much about it out loud. Night fell hard and fast. The transformation of the forest was startling. One moment we had the last traces of sunset, and the next, complete darkness, the kind that presses in on you from all sides. Under that black sky, we gathered around the flickering fire and ate a modest dinner. Maya, always pragmatic, checked her phone's battery. 75%, but no service. Evan's phone had died without warning, going from 50% to 0% in minutes. Chris said his phone was still at half, but that it kept restarting for no reason. It's probably just the lack of signal messing with them, I offered, not entirely convinced by my own explanation. As we finished our meal, Chris began recounting the story of the Hollow's embrace. According to some folklore, the land was said to harbor an ancient presence known colloquially as the Hollow Man, or the Ancient One. Some versions claimed it wasn't a single being, but a dark force that manipulated reality, feeding off the fear and confusion of intruders. Others told of hikers who vanished, only to reappear days or weeks later with no memory of who they were or what they had done. Over time, the stories diverged and merged, but the consistent thread was that people who ventured too far often didn't come back the same. I forced a laugh, trying to dispel the creeping dread. Well, I'm sure we'll be fine. We have plenty of supplies, a map, a compass. And each other, Evan added, giving a grin. You guys can rely on me for anything. I'm not afraid of some ghost story. Looking back, I wish we hadn't joked. I wish we had packed up right then and found a cheap motel. Instead, we let the tension dissipate with a few jokes, and we decided to turn in early. We planned to explore deeper in the morning. I remember retreating to my tent with Maya, zipping up the door behind us. Sleep came fitfully. I dreamed of twisted trees, silent figures standing at the edge of the clearing. At some point in the night, I woke to a strange hush. The wind had died down, and the forest seemed too quiet. I glanced at my phone. 2:23 a.m. Battery at 40%. Something made me check the tent zipper. I found it slightly undone. I was sure I had closed it fully, but I told myself I must have been careless. I dozed off again and woke in the early morning feeling groggy, as if I hadn't slept at all. To my surprise, I found my sleeping bag open, but instead of being unzipped at the foot, it was unzipped from the inside near my waist, as though someone had been inside with me, or I had unzipped it in my sleep. A cold sweat prickled my skin. I shook Maya awake and asked if she'd gotten up during the night. She said no, giving me a puzzled look. We exited the tent to find Chris and Evan already awake, gathering sticks for a morning fire. Evan looked at me, frowning. "Weird stuff, right?" he said, hooking a thumb over his shoulder. I found some of my gear moved around in the night. My backpack was 10 feet away from where I left it. "Maybe an animal?" Maya offered, though her voice lacked conviction. We rummaged through the pack, noticing nothing missing but a few protein bars had mold on them. Impossible, given they were store-bought and sealed. Disturbed, we tried to shrug it off, chalking it up to humidity or something equally mundane. Still, I saw the way Chris's brow furrowed and how Evan's normally easy grin tightened at the corners. We set off around mid-morning to do some exploring. Chris was determined to follow the old map to a small stream he said was marked with strange symbols. We trudged through the woods, occasionally checking the compass to confirm our direction. Thick underbrush made progress slow. The day was hot, and insects buzzed incessantly. We hiked for hours but couldn't locate the stream, as if the map had been mislabeled. Worse, the compass began to spin erratically every so often. One moment it pointed north, the next it swung toward the west in a lazy circle. Maya tapped it, scowled, and set it aside. Evan tried the GPS again. It flickered to life but glitched repeatedly, the screen distorting and the data unreadable. Each time we attempted to rely on technology, it let us down. Frustration built, but we kept going, convinced we'd find our destination eventually. We noticed then that the position of the sun seemed off. It felt like midday should have been hours past, but the sun was still high, or perhaps not as high as it should have been. I remembered looking at my phone's lock screen, 12:47 p.m., then glancing a little later to see 1:09 p.m., but it felt like we had been hiking for at least another hour and a half in that span. Time was slipping, skipping, or dragging, I couldn't tell which. When we finally gave up and turned back, the trail led us around in circles, forcing us past the same crooked oak tree twice. The first time, I recognized a particularly grotesque tangle of roots. The second time I saw it, my heart began hammering. Evan insisted he knew a shortcut, but we ended up deeper in the forest, the shadows stretching ominously. Chris stopped suddenly. "Something's not right," he said under his breath. "We should have been back at camp ages ago." I glanced at my phone again, 3:42 p.m., but the sun hadn't moved enough to indicate that much time. Or maybe it had moved more than it should have? My sense of time felt scrambled. Maya started to protest that we should keep trying to navigate using the compass, but she trailed off when she noticed the needle was once again spinning in lazy circles. Eventually, we stumbled upon the clearing with our tents, breathless and sweaty, as though we'd been running for our lives. None of us spoke for a few moments, too unsettled to acknowledge it aloud. That evening, we gathered for an early dinner. We were spooked, but we tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. We had brought a camp stove, but it sputtered, refusing to stay lit despite a full canister of fuel. Maya eventually got it working, and we heated up canned soup. Chris looked pale, haunted. "I don't think we're dealing with a normal forest," he whispered, voice trembling. "It's like the legend said, time doesn't behave properly here, and something's playing with us." Evan tried to put on a brave face, claiming we had simply taken a wrong turn, but even he seemed more subdued than usual. I caught him glancing over his shoulder every few seconds as if expecting to see someone sneaking up on us. That night, everything got worse. I awoke to a rustling outside our tent. I thought it might be Maya, but she was still beside me, breathing heavily in her sleep. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent. My heart jolted when I spotted footprints around the campfire. Human footprints, but far too large. And they led away into the trees, vanishing in the underbrush. Somehow, none of us had that shoe size, and it wasn't a bear print or anything like that. They were distinctly human. I froze, scanning the darkness with my flashlight. Nothing. My breath came shallow, and I hurried back into the tent, debating whether to wake the others. Ultimately, fear kept me silent. The next morning, I woke to a shout from Chris. He was frantic, pacing around the campsite. His sleeping bag was empty. At first, I thought he was talking about it being unzipped from the inside, but I realized he meant that he hadn't slept in it. He'd gone out to relieve himself in the night and never returned. But there he was, yelling at us. My mind reeled. If he was standing here, why was his sleeping bag still sealed in place as if he hadn't been in it at all? "You all right?" Evan asked, scratching his head. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Chris stared at his own sleeping bag, shaking. "I don't remember coming back. I went to pee, and I remember hearing a noise, then..." He trailed off, pressing his palms to his eyes as if to banish the memory. We soon realized Chris had no recollection of returning to the tent or sleeping. Instead, he insisted he'd only been gone a few minutes. Maya and I exchanged uneasy glances. Was Chris playing a prank? He looked too distraught for that. I reached out and touched his arm gently, and he flinched as though I'd burned him. I realized then that we weren't just lost in a weird forest anymore. We were in legitimate danger from forces or phenomena we couldn't begin to comprehend. To calm Chris down, we decided that we'd try to leave. If we could get to the car and drive away, we'd worry about our cut-short trip later. Packing in record time, we set off. Maya was at the front, compass in hand, while Evan double-checked the map. I tried to maintain my composure, though an unshakable sense of dread gnawed at me. Chris was eerily quiet, lagging behind as if in a daze. Within 20 minutes of walking, the forest thickened to a degree we hadn't encountered on the way in. Vines and brambles stretched across our path, forcing us to hack through them with a small camping hatchet. A sense of déjà vu fell over me. Then the trees parted, revealing a clearing. My stomach twisted. It was our campsite again. Somehow, we'd come full circle despite walking in a straight line. Evan cursed under his breath. How is that even possible? We stuck to a single direction. Maya shook the compass. It's broken, or this place is messing with it, just like everything else. For hours, we tried again and again to escape, but each time we ended up back at the clearing. Daylight was slipping away. Or maybe it wasn't. Time felt indescribably warped. My phone flickered a few times, the battery plummeting from 40% to 10% in a blink. Each time I glanced at the screen, the clock seemed to skip minutes or jump backwards. Anxiety spiked in my chest as the weight of our predicament became undeniable. We had no choice but to spend another night. I was trembling when we lit the fire, feeling trapped and desperate. Evan decided to go off alone to gather more firewood, ignoring my protests. He said we couldn't afford to split up, but someone has to get wood, and he'd be back quickly. Night crept in, painting the trees with dark, spidery shadows. Maya grew more agitated, muttering under her breath about how we shouldn't let anyone wander off alone. Chris sat near the fire, his eyes hollow, responding only with monosyllabic grunts when spoken to. I lost track of time, but it felt like an hour passed. Then another. We called Evan's name into the night, receiving only the hiss of wind in the pines. Maya wanted to go search for him, but fear kept her rooted. Finally, we saw the beam of a flashlight bobbing through the trees. Evan emerged, carrying an armful of sticks. Relief washed over me, until I looked into his face. Something was wrong. His eyes looked distant, his pupils dilated so wide that they nearly swallowed his irises. He wore a grin too wide to be natural, like someone pulling the corners of their lips as far as they would go. Without a word, he dropped the firewood in front of us, and then he just stood there, smiling. blinking too little. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. Maya gave a nervous laugh. "You okay, Evan?" He nodded, once, slowly, but he said nothing. The grin remained plastered to his face. Chris spoke up, voice trembling. "Hey, buddy. Everything all right out there?" Evan blinked once, twice. Then his smile faltered for half a second before snapping back into place. He turned his head, scanning the clearing like he'd never seen it before. Finally, he whispered, "It's behind the curtain." I exchanged a horrified look with Maya. Evan had never talked like that before, like someone repeating a phrase he'd heard but didn't understand. I reached out to touch his arm, but he jerked away violently, letting out a guttural snarl, as if he'd become an animal. "Evan, what happened?" I demanded, heart pounding. "Talk to us." He stared at me, unblinking, then repeated, "Don't look behind the curtain." Maya tried to reason with him, but he shoved her to the ground, the strength behind his push shocking us all. She let out a cry of pain. Evan then pivoted, stalking around the campsite in a slow circle, muttering incoherent words under his breath. I picked Maya up, and she rubbed her bruised shoulder, eyes wide with fear. Chris stood, took a step toward Evan. "Hey, man, we're all friends here," he said, raising his hands placatingly. But Evan's response was to roar a half-animalistic sound that sent chills through me. We managed to calm him enough to sit him down by the fire, but he wouldn't speak. He merely stared at the flames with that unnatural grin. Maya dabbed at the corner of her mouth where a trickle of blood from her fall had formed. I could see in her eyes a panic setting in, the same one crawling under my own skin. Eventually, exhaustion overcame us. We decided to take shifts, one person staying awake at all times. I volunteered for first watch. I sat there under the flickering flames, the smell of smoke and fear soaking into my clothes, while Chris and Maya dozed uneasily. Evan lay motionless in his sleeping bag, still wearing that unnerving smile, eyes half open. Every once in a while I'd hear him mumble about the curtain or start giggling softly. It sent a wave of goosebumps up my arms every time. Sometime later, I must have dozed off against my will. I woke with a start to find the fire nearly dead, the embers glowing faintly. My heart stuttered. I glanced around and saw Maya slumped against a log, but Chris and Evan weren't in their sleeping bags. Fear jabbed through me. I scrambled to my feet, shining my flashlight around the clearing. That's when I saw them. Evan and Chris silhouetted at the edge of the forest, standing impossibly still, shoulder to shoulder, both staring into the darkness ahead of them. I crept closer, calling their names softly. They didn't respond. They just stood like statues, facing away from me. A few steps away, a rancid smell assaulted my nostrils, like rotten meat and decaying leaves. I covered my mouth, fighting back a gag. When I got close enough, my flashlight caught Evan's face. He slowly turned, and I nearly screamed. His eyes were sunken, skin pale and stretched. The grin had vanished, replaced by a vacant expression that seemed neither fully awake nor fully alive. Chris, beside him, appeared similarly altered. He looked thinner, as if he'd lost 20 pounds in a single night. His cheeks were hollow, his lips cracked. Without warning, Chris lunged at me. I stumbled back, dropping my flashlight. I heard it clatter against the rocks, plunging us into near darkness. A hand raked at my shoulder, nails scraping skin. I cried out, swinging my arm in a wild arc. My fist connected with something solid, and Chris grunted. In the faint glow of distant embers, I saw him stagger. But then he came at me again, eyes crazed, mouth twisted in a silent snarl. It was Maya who saved me. She must have woken up and realized what was happening. She came running, brandishing the small camping hatchet we'd used earlier. She screamed at Chris to stop, brandishing the dull blade between us. He hissed, an inhuman sound, then turned and disappeared into the darkness with shocking speed. We spun around looking for Evan, but he was nowhere to be seen. I grabbed my flashlight, fumbling to turn it back on. Its beam flickered weakly, nearly dying, then stabilized. We ran back to the dying fire, panting, trying to figure out what was happening. Maya kept saying, "That wasn't Chris, that wasn't Chris," over and over like a mantra. We huddled together, stoking the fire back to life, my shoulder aching where Chris had torn at my jacket. Blood seeped through the fabric, not enough to be life-threatening, but enough to remind me that this was horrifyingly real. We couldn't sleep. We whispered about leaving, but we knew the forest would just guide us back, or lead us to something worse. Dawn came, and with it, a false sense of relief. The sun's light trickled through the trees, but I felt no warmth, no safety. For a while, Maya and I just sat, too frightened to move. Then I saw Evan shambling at the edge of the clearing. He was alone, arms hanging limp at his sides. When he turned, I saw a smear of something dark on his lips. My stomach lurched. "Evan?" I called softly. He twitched. "Where's Chris?" No answer. His gaze flicked to the hatchet in Maya's hand, and his eyes narrowed. Then, without a word, he walked past the clearing and disappeared behind a cluster of trees. I was too terrified to follow him. Maya was on the verge of tears. "We can't stay here," she whispered. "We'll die if we do." But I didn't see a path out. The forest was messing with our sense of direction, with time itself. We still had some water and food, but it felt tainted by the environment. Our plan was to keep trying to find the car, no matter how many times it turned us around. We packed quickly, leaving behind the heavier gear we couldn't carry. My shoulders ached from the weight of my pack, from fear, from the wound. We set off in what we believed was the right direction, using the rising sun to guide us. For hours we trudged in silence, occasionally hearing echoes in the distance, branches snapping, maybe footsteps. Maya and I avoided talking about Chris and Evan, but they haunted our every thought. Then, unbelievably, we found the car. It sat where we'd left it, dusty but intact. Relief surged through me so powerfully that tears filled my eyes. We sprinted the last few yards. Maya yanked the driver's side door open, and I fumbled for the keys in the glove compartment, praying I'd left them there. My breath caught in my throat when I couldn't immediately see them, but then I found them beneath a folded map. My hands shook as I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine coughed once, twice, then roared to life. For a blissful moment, it felt like we'd actually be free. That's when Evan stepped into view from behind the car. He moved with a jerkiness that reminded me of a puppet on tangled strings. His eyes seemed black, and he stared at us through the windshield. Before Maya could shift into gear, he lunged at the passenger side, yanking the door open. I screamed, trying to push him away, but he was unnaturally strong. His hand shot forward, grabbing me by the hair, pulling me out of the seat. I felt the door frame slam into my ribs. The pain was immediate and excruciating. Maya shrieked, fighting to free me. In desperation, she slammed her foot onto the gas pedal. The car lurched forward with me partially outside. Evan lost his grip, stumbling back with a snarl, but he managed to grab hold of my backpack and wrench it free from my arms. I tumbled back into my seat, the seatbelt half choking me, and Maya tore down the dirt road as fast as she could. For a few staggering minutes, we drove, the trees whizzing by. My heart hammered, and I kept checking the side mirror, expecting to see Evan behind us in an impossible sprint. But the road stretched on, the forest parted, and the midday sun felt blinding. Relief washed over me. We were out. We were really out. I reached for Maya's hand, tears streaming down my face. She glanced at me, her own eyes wet. "We made it," she choked out. The car sputtered, lurching violently. The engine groaned, then died completely, forcing Maya to wrestle the steering wheel to keep control. We rolled to a stop in a clearing I didn't recognize. My heart thundered. This wasn't the road we'd driven in on. This was something else. "How is this possible?" Maya cried, staring out the window in horror. The land around us was the same oppressive forest, the same twisted pines. No sign of civilization, no sign of the main road. It was like we'd never left. Or, worse, like the forest had rearranged itself, ensuring we couldn't escape. The car wouldn't start again. We tried repeatedly, turning the key until the starter motor simply clicked. It felt like a nightmare. The sense of hopelessness surged inside me, a black hole threatening to swallow my sanity. Maya and I got out of the car and stood in silence, staring at each other, the reality of our predicament sinking in with painful clarity. Then, suddenly, Chris appeared. He limped from the tree line, his clothes torn and caked with mud. A savage joy lit up my chest at seeing him alive, but that joy drained away when I noticed the emptiness in his eyes. He looked even more emaciated than before, as if drained of vitality. He approached in a halting gait, arms limp. My gut told me to run, but something about Chris's face stopped me. He wasn't smiling. He wore a look of anguish, like someone aware of their suffering but powerless to stop it. "Chris?" I ventured. He lifted his eyes to mine, lips parting in a silent plea. For a moment I thought he was back to normal, then he twitched violently, as if struck by an electric shock. His jaw clenched, and in the next instant he lunged at me. I barely had time to scream. He slammed me against the side of the car, fingers locked around my throat. Maya shrieked, grabbed the hatchet from the back seat and tried to pull him off. With staggering strength, Chris spun and shoved her onto the ground, kicking her in the side. I heard a crack as she slammed into a rock or root, a strangled cry escaping her lips. "You're not Chris," I choked out, tears burning my eyes. My nails raked across his forearms, but he didn't seem to feel pain. He grinned then, a ghastly smile lacking any humanity. "No!" he hissed, voice distorted. "Chris is gone." With one hand, he wrenched the hatchet from Maya's grip, raising it high. She scrambled back, terror etched on her features. In a blinding moment of adrenaline, I hurled myself at him from behind, grabbing his arm. We struggled, and the hatchet tumbled away. Chris spun around, snarling, and struck me in the jaw with enough force to send me sprawling. My vision blurred, and I tasted blood in my mouth. I saw Maya trying to crawl toward the hatchet, tears streaming down her face from pain and terror. Chris loomed over her, his foot pressing down on her injured side. She gasped, eyes rolling back. He reached for the hatchet with a slow, predatory motion. "No!" I screamed, stumbling forward. I tackled him at the waist, surprising him enough that he fell sideways. Maya seized the hatchet, raising it tremblingly. Chris, or the thing that wore his face, tried to stand, so I put all my weight on his back, pinning him. He bucked, hissing obscenities in a voice that occasionally sounded like Chris's but was far too guttural. Then Maya, in a sobbing fit of desperation, brought the hatchet down on his thigh. He screamed, thrashing wildly. I scrambled away, not wanting to be hit by his flailing limbs. Blood stained the pine needles. The air reeked of rust and rot. His scream turned into a wet, gargling sound. I could see the hatchet's blade embedded in his leg, an injury that should have incapacitated any normal person. But Chris pushed himself upright on one hand, trying to claw at us with the other. Something in me shattered at that moment. This was a friend we loved, or at least had been, but he was gone, replaced by a monstrosity wearing his skin. I reached for a heavy rock near the car's tire and, barely thinking, slammed it into the side of his head. Once, twice, 3 times. The sounds were nauseating. Wet thuds, bone cracking. He finally stopped moving, collapsing in a heap. I backed away, hyperventilating, tears streaming down my face, my hands shaking so violently that I almost dropped the rock. Maya crumpled onto her knees, sobbing. We stared at Chris's body, my pulse pounding in my ears. We had just killed our friend. No, we had killed something that was wearing him, if that made it any better. My stomach churned, and I vomited beside the car, the bitter taste of bile mixing with the thick smell of coppery blood. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time felt meaningless again, slipping through our fingers like the pine needles beneath our feet. We were too stunned to speak, too traumatized to form coherent thoughts. Finally, Maya whispered, "We have to go. We can't stay here with that." I nodded, wiping tears and bile from my mouth. Neither of us dared to close Chris's eyes. We just left him there, his lifeless body still contorted in a way that made my skin crawl. Maya tried the car's engine once more, hoping beyond hope it would start. It didn't. We each took a water bottle from the trunk, the remainder of our supplies, and set off again, stumbling like the living dead. My ribs ached where I'd been slammed into the car, and every breath came with a twinge of pain. We walked until darkness fell again, following no particular direction, just desperate to leave. At some point, we found ourselves on a faint trail that seemed to lead downward, maybe toward a valley. The air felt heavier there, tinged with the odor of decay. Tree branches clawed at the sky, as if trying to block out the moonlight. My flashlight sputtered, 4% battery left. Maya's phone was completely dead. We pressed on, guided mostly by the pale glow of the moon. Suddenly, we heard a voice calling from ahead. My heart lurched. I recognized it instantly as Evan's. Maya grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. We exchanged terrified looks. Did we dare approach him after what had happened with Chris? But his voice sounded normal, pleading even. "Lena, Maya, help me," Evan's voice croaked. We crept forward, rounding a bend. My flashlight revealed Evan slumped at the base of a tree, one leg twisted at an awkward angle, eyes dull. His face was pale, drawn, as though every drop of vitality had been sucked out of him. "Please," he rasped. I don't know what's happening." My instinct was to run, to leave him, but a pang of loyalty and guilt made me linger. Maya hung back, hatchet in hand, ready to defend herself. I knelt a few feet away from Evan, shining the light on his twisted leg. It looked broken, bone possibly protruding beneath the skin. "Evan, what did you do?" I asked softly, tears again threatening to fall. He shook his head, confusion etched on his features. "I don't remember. He paused, eyes flicking to the hatchet. "Chris? Where's Chris?" That question tore at me. I couldn't form the words. My throat constricted and I shook my head helplessly. Evan swallowed hard, realization dawning in his eyes. He tried to shuffle closer, wincing at the pain in his leg. Then, something snapped. He blinked too slowly, his expression shifting from pain to vacancy. "No," I murmured. "No, not again." He stared at me, lips curling in that sickening grin I remembered from before. Maya screamed a warning. Without hesitation, I scrambled backward. Even with a broken leg, Evan lurched forward, swiping at me with unnatural speed. The grin twisted into a snarl. I felt his fingernails rake against my arm. I kicked out, connecting with his ribs. He let out a breathy grunt and collapsed, rolling onto his back. Maya hovered over him, hatchet raised. I yelled for her to stop, though I didn't know why. Maybe I still held on to hope that some piece of Evan remained. but he sneered up at us, eyes dark, no sign of humanity. Maya's face was a mask of terror and rage. She lifted the hatchet higher. She never got the chance to bring it down. In a last burst of strength, Evan kicked out with his good leg, knocking her off balance. She toppled to the ground, and the hatchet flew out of her grip, skittering across the forest floor. Evan lunged, hands wrapping around her neck. Maya choked, struggling, her heels digging into the earth. I lunged for the hatchet, adrenaline surging. My fingertips brushed its handle. Evan must have sensed me because he tore his gaze from Maya and snarled at me. He released her, swinging his arm at my face. His knuckles caught my cheekbone, sending me reeling. Pain flashed white-hot behind my eyes and I tumbled sideways, but I'd managed to clutch the hatchet. As I fought off dizziness, I felt him crawl over my legs, trying to pin me. I swung blindly. The blade connected with flesh, burying itself in his chest. A horrible wheeze escaped his lips. He slumped forward, coughing up blood. His eyes locked with mine for a moment. The darkness receding, replaced by a flicker of recognition. He mouthed something. My name, perhaps. Then his eyes went glassy. The forest went silent again except for my ragged breathing and Maya's desperate gasps. I pushed him off me with trembling arms, tears cutting hot paths down my cheeks. My mind felt shattered. All of this carnage, all of this terror. I wanted to wake up in my bed safe, but reality smothered me like a suffocating blanket. Maya crawled to me, sobbing quietly. We clung to each other, the lifeless form of Evan at our feet. We stayed like that for a long time, bathed in moonlight and shock, the echo of tragedy pounding in our ears. Eventually, we forced ourselves to move. Dawn was creeping in, the horizon a muted gray. We left Evan where he lay. We left everything but the hatchet and the water. We couldn't bury them, couldn't give them the dignity they deserved. We just had to get out or die trying. Our clothes were soaked in blood, torn. We stumbled onward, every step a painful reminder of the violence we'd endured. Time became a blur of stumbling, darkness around the edges of our vision, and near delirium. Once, I thought I heard someone call my name in Chris's voice, and I almost answered before Maya pulled me away. My entire body felt numb. My shoulder ached from the earlier attack and my ribs throbbed with each breath. Maya limped, likely from the injury Chris had inflicted. We were a pair of wounded animals, hearts beating on borrowed time. Finally, in a half-conscious daze, I realized the trees were thinning. The canopy gave way to a wide, dusty road. At first, my mind couldn't make sense of it, convinced it was another trick, but this road was different. Familiar in the sense that it was an actual road, not just a trail. We followed it. I forced one foot in front of the other, ignoring the screaming protest of my muscles. We trudged for what felt like an eternity. Then, in the distance, I saw a sign, a simple, battered metal sign that read, Route 287. My heart slammed in my chest. We'd found a real highway. Relief warred with paranoia. Was it another trap? But when I spotted a gas station far down the road, my hopes soared. We staggered toward it, tears mixing with sweat. The gas station was run down, but it was there, and it was real. A battered pickup truck was parked out front. We sank to our knees, sobbing in disbelief. A man in a dirty cap stepped out of the gas station, staring wide-eyed at the sight of us. Covered in blood and dirt, looking more like feral creatures than lost hikers. He rushed over, asking if we were okay, and I remember babbling incoherently, words tumbling out about the forest, about Chris and Evan. He tried to calm us, telling us to breathe, and that he'd call for help. I didn't believe him until I saw him pull out a phone that actually had reception. He called 911, and I heard the operator's voice faintly through the static. That's the last coherent thing I remember before everything went dark. I woke in a hospital room days later. Maya was there, alive and bandaged, dozing in a chair. She had a cast on her arm. Nurses told me I was lucky to have survived, that we'd both suffered severe dehydration, multiple injuries, and shock. They'd found no trace of Chris or Evan, nor the car we mentioned. Search parties combed the edges of that forest, but the hollow's embrace seemed to have swallowed any evidence of them. The authorities questioned us about the two missing men. Our story sounded insane even to my own ears. Possessions, time warping, the forest refusing to let us leave. We gave them everything we could, but they treated us like we were in shock, our statements delirious. Ultimately, the official report listed Chris Johnson and Evan Harris as missing persons. Foul play wasn't ruled out, but no suspects were named. No remains were recovered. Once I was discharged, I tried to go back to my normal life. But normal no longer existed for me. My nights were filled with nightmares of twisted trees and vacant-eyed friends. I'd wake in a cold sweat, half convinced I heard Evan's rasping voice outside my window. Maya and I kept in touch, but our conversations were fraught with shared trauma. Neither of us fully healed, and I'm not sure we ever will. Sometimes I stare at the map Chris had given me, the photocopy of that old archival record he left in my trunk before we set out. The lines and symbols no longer make sense. They shift, as if the paper itself is infected by that place. A part of me is terrified that the forest still calls out for us, that it's biding its time, waiting for our minds to fray enough to wander back in. I've kept away, obviously, but even at home, surrounded by walls and locked doors, I can't escape the sense that the hollow's embrace might have followed me, lurking just beyond my periphery. The doctors say it's PTSD, that therapy and medication can help me cope. They might be right, but I'm not sure any amount of therapy can truly explain what happened out there, or how the land warped reality around us. I'm left with an unshakable dread, a knowledge that some places in this world defy comprehension. Sometimes I catch myself listening for faint whispers in the wind, expecting the lights to flicker in strange colors. At night, I dream of Chris and Evan, alive but different, standing at the foot of my bed with two wide smiles. I wish I could say I've come to terms with it, that I've rationalized it or found a neat explanation. But I haven't. Maybe I never will. Maybe the best I can do is share my story to warn anyone who might be as foolish and curious as we were. Because the hollow's embrace is still there, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to wander in. And if you go, it won't just take your life. It'll twist your mind, corrupt your spirit, and leave you questioning everything you think you know about the nature of reality. That's what happened to me, Lena Davis, in September of 2024, and that's why I'll never set foot in those woods again. If you're smart, neither will you, oh one.